Stories by English authors. By an unknown author. The Courting of Tinohead's Belle by J. M. Barrie. For 2 years it had been notorious in the square that Samuel Dickey was thinking of courting Tinohead's Belle, and that if little Sanders Elshioner, which is the Thrum's pronunciation of Alexander, went in for her, he might prove a formidable rival. Samuel was a weaver in the tenements, and Sanders a coal carter, whose trademark was a bell on his horse's neck that told when coal was coming. Being something of a public man, Sanders had not, perhaps, so high a social position as Samuel, but he had succeeded his father on the coal cart, while the weaver had already tried several trades. It had always been against Samuel, too, that once when the kirk was vacant he had advised the selection of the third minister who preached for it on the ground that it became expensive to pay a large number of candidates. The scandal of the thing was hushed up, out of respect for his father, who was a God-fearing man, but Samuel was known by it in Lang Tamaz's circle. The coal carter was called Little Sanders to distinguish him from his father, who was not much more than half his size. He had grown up with the name, and its inapplicability now came home to nobody. Samuel's mother had been more far-seeing than Sanders. Her man had been called Sammy all his life because it was the name he got as a boy, so when their eldest son was born she spoke of him as Samuel while still in the cradle. The neighbors imitated her, and thus the young man had a better start in life than had been granted to Sammy, his father. It was Saturday evening, the night in the week when all licked young men fell in love. Samuel Dickey, wearing a blue Glengarry bonnet with a red ball on the top, came to the door of the one-story house in the tenements, and stood there wriggling, for he was in a suit of tweed for the first time that week, and did not feel at one with them. When his feeling of being a stranger to himself wore off, he looked up and down the road, which straggles between houses and gardens, and then, picking his way over the puddles, crossed to his father's hen-house and sat down on it. He was now on his way to the square. Ippy Fargus was sitting on an adjoining dyke knitting stockings, and Samuel looked at her for a time. "Is yersel, Ippy?" he said at last. "It's a that," said Ippy. "Who's a why ye?" asked Samuel. "We're just affin on," replied Ippy cautiously. There was not much more to say, but as Samuel sidled off the hen-house he murmured politely, "Aye." In another minute he would have been fairly started, but Ippy resumed the conversation. "Samuel," she said, with a twinkle in her eye, "ye can tell Lisbeth Fargus I'll likely be drappin' in on her aboot Munday or Tuesday." Lisbeth was sister to Ippy, and wife of Tamaz McQuaddy, better known as Tinohead, which was the name of his farm. She was thus Belle's mistress. Samuel leaned against the hen-house as if all his desire to depart had gone. "Who do ye ken I'll be at the Tinohead the nicht?" he asked, grinning in anticipation. "Oh, I see warrant ye'll be after Belle," said Ippy. "And no sa sure o' that," said Samuel, trying to leer. He was enjoying himself now. "And no sure o' that," he repeated, for Ippy seemed lost in stitches. "Samuel!" "Aye?" "Ye'll be speerin' her soon no, I dinna doot?" This took Samuel, who had only been courting Belle for a year or two, a little aback. "Who do ye mean, Ippy?" he asked. "Maybe ye'll do tea the nicht." "Nah, there's nae hurry," said Samuel. We're a coont in on tea, Samuel." "Gi why ye?" "What for no?" "Gi why ye?" said Samuel again. "Belle's gay and fond o' ye, Samuel." "Aye," said Samuel. "But am dootin' ye're a fell billy why the lasses." I do not kin, moderate," said Samuel, in high delight. "I saw ye," said Ippy, speaking with a wire in her mouth, "gain on turbly why Micey Haggart at the pump last Saturday." "We was juist a moosin' oursel's," said Samuel. "It'll be nae amusement to Micey," said Ippy. "Gin ye brak her heart." "Losh, Ippy," said Samuel, "I didna think o' that. Ye maun kin weel, Samuel, at there's mony a lass would jump at ye." "Oh, you weel," said Samuel, implying that a man must take these things as they come. "For ye're a dainty chield to look at, Samuel." "Do ye think so, Ippy?" Aye. Oh, I do not kin em a nithing by the ordner." "Ye mayna be," said Ippy, "but lasses do esna do to be our particler." Samuel resented this, and prepared to depart again. You'll no tell Belle that? He asked anxiously. Tell her what? Aboot me and Micey. We'll see who ye behave yoursel, Samuel. Know what I care, it be, ye can tell her gin ye like. I wouldna think twice o' tellin' her missel dot. The Lord forge ye for Leon, Samuel, said Ippy, as he disappeared down Tammy Tosh's close. Here he came upon Henders Webster. Ye're late, Samuel, said Henders. What for? Oh, I was thinkin' you would be gain the length o' Tino had the nicht, and I saw Sanders Elshner Mac and SWY there near sign. Did ye? Cried Samuel, adding craftily. But it's naething to me. Tod, lad, said Henders. Gin ye dinna buckle to, Sanders'll be carryin' her off. Samuel flung back his head and passed on. Samuel! Cried Henders after him. Aye, said Samuel, wheeling round. Gi'e Belle a kiss frae me. The full force of this joke struck neither all at once. Samuel began to smile at it as he turned down the school wind, and it came upon Henders while he was in his garden feeding his ferret. Then he slapped his legs gleefully, and explained the conceit to Willem Byers, who went into the house and thought it over. There were 12 or 20 little groups of men in the square, which was lit by a flare of oil suspended over a cadger's cart. Now and again a staid young woman passed through the square with a basket on her arm, and if she had lingered long enough to give them time, some of the idlers would have addressed her. As it was, they gazed after her, and then grinned to each other. Aye, Samuel, said 2 or 3 young men, as Samuel joined them beneath the town clock. Aye, Davit, replied Samuel. This group was composed of some of the sharpest wits in Thrums, and it was not to be expected that they would let this opportunity pass. Perhaps when Samuel joined them he knew what was in store for him. Was ye lookin' for Tino Head's Belle, Samuel? Asked one. Or mebbe ye was wantin' the minister? Suggested another, the same who had walked out twice with Kirsty Duff and not married her after all. Samuel could not think of a good reply at the moment, so he laughed good-naturedly. Undoubtedly she's a snod bit critter, said Davit archly. And michty clever why her fingers, added Jamie Duchars. Man, I've thocht o' mackin' up to Belle Missile, said Pete Ogle. Would there be ony chance, think ye, Samuel? I'm thinkin' she wouldna hae ye for her first, Pete, replied Samuel, in one of those happy flashes that come to some men. But there's nae sayin' but what she micht tak ye to finish up why dot. The unexpectedness of this sally startled every one. Though Samuel did not set up for a wit, however, like Davit, it was notorious that he could say a cutting thing once in a way. Did ye ever see Belle redden up? Asked Pete, recovering from his overthrow. He was a man who bore no malice. It's a sicht, said Samuel, solemnly. Who will that be? Asked Jamie Duchars. It's will worth your while, said Pete, to jing a tower to the Tino Head and see. Ye'll mind the closed-in beds i' the kitchen? Aye, we'll, they're a fell spoiled crew, Tino Head's litlins, and know that aisy to manage. If the lasses Lisbeth's hen had a michty trouble wi' them. When they wore I the middle o' their reddin' up the bairns would come tumblin' aboot the floor, but Sal, I assure ye, Belle didna fash lang wi' them. Did she, Samuel? She did not, said Samuel, dropping into a fine mode of speech to add emphasis to his remark. I'll tell you what she did, said Pete to the others. She just lifted up the litlins, TWA at a time, and flung them into the coffin beds. Syne she snibbit the doors on them, and keepit them there till the floor was dry. Aye, man, did she so? Said Davit admiringly. I've seen her do tea missile, said Samuel. There's no a lassie Max better bannocks this side o' Fetterlums, continued Pete. Her mither talked her that, said Samuel. She was a grand hon at the Bequeen, Kitty Ogilvy. I've heard say, remarked Jamie, putting it this way so as not to tie himself down to anything. At Belle's scones is equal to Mag Lunnon's. So they are, said Samuel, almost fiercely. I ken she's a neat hon at Singy a hen, said Pete. Nyta, said Davit. She's a snod canty bit stocky in her Sabbath clays. If anything thick in the waist, suggested Jamie. I dinna see that, said Samuel. I do not care for her hair either, continued Jamie, who was very nice in his tastes. Something mere yallowchy would be an improvement. Bodykins, growled Samuel. At black hair's the bonniest. The others chuckled. Poor Samuel, Pete said. Samuel, not being certain whether this should be received with a smile or a frown, opened his mouth wide as a kind of compromise. This was position one with him for thinking things over. Few Auld Licks, as I have said, went the length of choosing a helpmate for themselves. One day a young man's friends would see him mending the washing tub of a maiden's mother. They kept the joke until Saturday night, and then he learned from them what he had been after. It dazed him for a time, but in a year or so he grew accustomed to the idea, and they were then married. With a little help he fell in love just like other people. Samuel was going the way of the others, but he found it difficult to come to the point. He only went courting once a week, and he could never take up the running at the place where he left off the Saturday before. Thus he had not, so far, made great headway. His method of making up to Belle had been to drop in at Tino Head on Saturday nights and talk with the farmer about the rinderpest. The farm kitchen was Belle's testimonial. Its chairs, tables, and stools were scoured by her to the whiteness of Rob Angus's sawmill boards, and the muslin blind on the window was starched like a child's pinafore. Belle was brave, too, as well as energetic. Once Thrums had been overrun with thieves. It is now thought that there may have been only one, but he had the wicked cleverness of a gang. Such was his repute that there were weavers who spoke of locking their doors when they went from home. He was not very skillful, however, being generally caught, and when they said they knew he was a robber, he gave them their things back and went away. If they had given him time, there is no doubt that he would have gone off with his plunder. One night he went to Tino Head, and Belle, who slept in the kitchen, was awakened by the noise. She knew who it would be, so she rose and dressed herself, and went to look for him with a candle. The thief had not known what to do when he got in, and as it was very lonely he was glad to see Belle. She told him he ought to be ashamed of himself, and would not let him out by the door until he had taken off his boots so as not to soil the carpet. On this Saturday evening Samuel stood his ground in the square, until by and by he found himself alone. There were other groups there still, but his circle had melted away. They went separately, and no one said good night. Each took himself off slowly, backing out of the group until he was fairly started. Samuel looked about him, and then, seeing that the others had gone, walked round the townhouse into the darkness of the brae that leads down, and then up to the farm of Tino Head. To get into the good graces of Lisbeth Fargus you had to know her ways and humor them. Samuel, who was a student of women, knew this, and so, instead of pushing the door open and walking in, he went through the rather ridiculous ceremony of knocking. Sanders Elshioner was also aware of this weakness of Lisbeth's, but though he often made up his mind to knock, the absurdity of the thing prevented his doing so when he reached the door. Tino Head himself had never got used to his wife's refined notions, and when anyone knocked he always started to his feet, thinking there must be something wrong. Lisbeth came to the door, her expansive figure blocking the way in. "Samuel," she said. "Lisbeth," said Samuel. He shook hands with the farmer's wife, knowing that she liked it, but only said, "Aye, Belle," to his sweetheart. "Aye, Tino Head," to McQuaddy, and "It's yourself, Sanders," to his rival. They were all sitting round the fire, Tino Head, with his feet on the ribs, wondering why he felt so warm, and Belle darned a stocking, while Lisbeth kept an eye on a goblet full of potatoes. "Sit into the fire, Samuel," said the farmer, not, however, making way for him. "Na," said Samuel. "I'm to bide nae time." Then he sat into the fire. His face was turned away from Belle, and when she spoke he answered her without looking round. Samuel felt a little anxious. Sanders Elshioner, who had one leg shorter than the other, but looked well when sitting, seemed suspiciously at home. He asked Belle questions out of his own head, which was beyond Samuel, and once he said something to her in such a low voice that the others could not catch it. Tino had asked curiously what it was, and Sanders explained that he had only said, "Aye, Belle, the morn's the Sabbath." There was nothing startling in this, but Samuel did not like it. He began to wonder if he were too late, and had he seen his opportunity would have told Bell of a nasty rumor that Sanders intended to go over to the Free Church if they would make him Kirk officer. Samuel had the goodwill of Tinohead's wife, who liked a polite man. Sanders did his best, but from want of practice he constantly made mistakes. Tonight, for instance, he wore his hat in the house because he did not like to put up his hand and take it off. Tinohead had not taken his off either, but that was because he meant to go out by and by and lock the byre door. It was impossible to say which of her lovers Belle preferred. The proper course with an auld-licht lassie was to prefer the man who proposed to her. "Ye'll bide a wee, and hae something to eat?" Lisbeth asked Samuel, with her eyes on the goblet. "No, I thank ye," said Samuel, with true gentility. "Ye'll better. I dinna think it. Hoots I, what's to hinder ye? Weel, since ye're sa presin, I'll bide." No one asked Sanders to stay. Belle could not, for she was but the servant, and Tinohead knew that the kick his wife had given him meant that he was not to do so either. Sanders whistled to show that he was not uncomfortable. "Aye, then, I'll be stappin' ower the brae," he said at last. He did not go, however. There was sufficient pride in him to get him off his chair, but only slowly, for he had to get accustomed to the notion of going. At intervals of 2 or 3 minutes he remarked that he must now be going. In the same circumstances Samuel would have acted similarly. For a Thrums man, it is one of the hardest things in life to get away from anywhere. At last Lisbeth saw that something must be done. The potatoes were burning, and Tinohead had an invitation on his tongue. "Yes, I'll hate to be movin'," said Sanders hopelessly for the 5th time. "Gi dinnick to ye then, Sanders," said Lisbeth. "Gi the door a flink to a hent ye." Sanders, with a mighty effort, pulled himself together. He looked boldly at Belle, and then took off his hat carefully. Samuel saw with misgivings that there was something in it which was not a handkerchief. It was a paper bag glittering with gold braid, and contained such an assortment of sweets as lads bought for their lasses on the Muckle Friday. "Hey, Belle," said Sanders, handing the bag to Belle in an offhand way as if it were but a trifle. Nevertheless, he was a little excited, for he went off without saying good night. No one spoke. Belle's face was crimson. Tinohead fidgeted on his chair, and Lisbeth looked at Samuel. The weaver was strangely calm and collected, though he would have liked to know whether this was a proposal. "Sit and bite to the table, Samuel," said Lisbeth, trying to look as if things were as they had been before. She put a saucerful of butter, salt, and pepper near the fire to melt, for melted butter is the shoeing horn that helps over a meal of potatoes. Samuel, however, saw what the hour required, and jumping up, he seized his bonnet. "Hing the tatties higher up the joist, Lisbeth," he said with dignity. "I see be back in 10 minutes." He hurried out of the house, leaving the others looking at each other. "What do ye think?" asked Lisbeth. "I do not kin," faltered Belle. "They tatties is lang o' come into the boil," said Tinohead. In some circles a lover who behaved like Samuel would have been suspected of intent upon his rival's life, but neither Belle nor Lisbeth did the weaver that injustice. In a case of this kind it does not much matter what Tinohead thought. The 10 minutes had barely passed when Samuel was back in the farm kitchen. He was too flurried to knock this time, and indeed, Lisbeth did not expect it of him. "Belle, hey!" he cried, handing his sweetheart a tinsel bag twice the size of Sanders' gift. "Losh preserve s!" exclaimed Lisbeth. "I see warrant there's a shillin's worth." "There's a that, Lisbeth, and mair," said Samuel, firmly. "I thank ye, Samuel," said Belle, feeling an unwonted elation as she gazed at the 2 paper bags in her lap. "Ye're our extravagant, Samuel," Lisbeth said. "Not at all," said Samuel. "Not at all. But I wouldn't advise ye to eat the ither aints, Belle, they're second quality." Belle drew back a step from Samuel. "How do ye kin?" asked the farmer, shortly, for he liked Sanders. "I speered at the shop," said Samuel. The goblet was placed on a broken plate on the table, with the saucer beside it, and Samuel, like the others, helped himself. What he did was to take potatoes from the pot with his fingers, peel off their coats, and then dip them into the butter. Lisbeth would have liked to provide knives and forks, but she knew that beyond a certain point Tino Head was master in his own house. As for Samuel, he felt victory in his hands, and began to think that he had gone too far. In the meantime Sanders, little witting that Samuel had trumped his trick, was sauntering along the kirk wynd with his hat on the side of his head. Fortunately he did not meet the minister. The courting of Tino Head's bell reached its crisis one Sabbath about a month after the events above recorded. The minister was in great force that day, but it is no part of mine to tell how he bore himself. I was there, and am not likely to forget the scene. It was a fateful Sabbath for Tino Head's bell and her swains, and destined to be remembered for the painful scandal which they perpetrated in their passion. Bell was not in the kirk. There being an infant of 6 months in the house, it was a question of either Lisbeth or the lassie staying at home with him, and though Lisbeth was unselfish in a general way, she could not resist the delight of going to church. She had 9 children besides the baby, and being but a woman, it was the pride of her life to march them into the Tino Head pew, so well watched that they dared not misbehave, and so tightly packed that they could not fall. The congregation looked at that pew, the mothers enviously, when they sang the lines. The first half of the service had been gone through on this particular Sunday without anything remarkable happening. It was at the end of the psalm which preceded the sermon that Sanders Elshioner, who sat near the door, lowered his head until it was no higher than the pews, and in that attitude, looking almost like a 4-footed animal, slipped out of the church. In their eagerness to be at the sermon, many of the congregation did not notice him, and those who did put the matter by in their minds for future investigation. Samuel, however, could not take it so coolly. From his seat in the gallery he saw Sanders disappear, and his mind misgave him. With the true lover's instinct he understood it all. Sanders had been struck by the fine turnout in the Tino Head pew. Bell was alone at the farm. What an opportunity to work one's way up to a proposal! Tino Head was so overrun with children that such a chance seldom occurred, except on a Sabbath. Sanders, doubtless, was off to propose, and he, Samuel, was left behind. The suspense was terrible. Samuel and Sanders had both known all along that Bell would take the first of the two who asked her. Even those who thought her proud admitted that she was modest. Bitterly the weaver repented having waited so long. Now it was too late. In 10 minutes Sanders would be at Tino Head. In an hour all would be over. Samuel rose to his feet in a daze. His mother pulled him down by the coat-tail, and his father shook him, thinking he was walking in his sleep. He tottered past them, however, hurried up the aisle, which was so narrow that Daniel Ross could only reach his seat by walking sideways, and was gone before the minister could do more than stop in the middle of a whirl and gape in horror after him. A number of the congregation felt that day the advantage of sitting in the loft. What was a mystery to those downstairs was revealed to them. From the gallery windows they had a fine open view to the south, and as Samuel took the common, which was a short cut through a steep ascent, to Tino Head, he was never out of their line of vision. Sanders was not to be seen, but they guessed rightly the reason why. Thinking he had ample time, he had gone round by the main road to save his boots, perhaps a little scared by what was coming. Samuel's design was to forestall him by taking the shorter path over the burn and up the calm Monte. It was a race for a wife, and several onlookers in the gallery braved the minister's displeasure to see who won. Those who favored Samuel's suit exultingly saw him leap the stream, while the friends of Sanders fixed their eyes on the top of the common where it ran into the road. Sanders must come into sight there, and the one who reached this point first would get Bell. As Auld Lichts do not walk abroad on the Sabbath, Sanders would probably not be delayed. The chances were in his favor. Had it been any other day in the week Samuel might have run. So some of the congregation in the gallery were thinking, when suddenly they saw him bend low, and then take to his heels. He had caught sight of Sanders' head bobbing over the hedge that separated the road from the common, and feared that Sanders might see him. The congregation who could crane their necks sufficiently saw a black object, which they guessed to be the carter's hat, crawling along the hedge-top. For a moment it was motionless, and then it shot ahead. The rivals had seen each other. It was now a hot race. Samuel, dissembling no longer, clattered up the common, becoming smaller and smaller to the onlookers as he neared the top. More than one person in the gallery almost rose to their feet in their excitement. Samuel had it. No, Sanders was in front. Then the two figures disappeared from view. They seemed to run into each other at the top of the brae, and no one could say who was first. The congregation looked at one another. Some of them perspired. But the minister held on his course. Samuel had just been in time to cut Sanders out. It was the weaver saving that Sanders saw this when his rival turned the corner, for Samuel was sadly blown. Sanders took in the situation and gave in at once. The last 100 yards of the distance he covered at his leisure, and when he arrived at his destination he did not go in. It was a fine afternoon for the time of year, and he went round to have a look at the pig, about which Tino Head was a little sinfully puffed up. "Aye," said Sanders, digging his fingers critically into the grunting animal. "Quite so." "Grumph," said the pig, getting reluctantly to his feet. "Oh, yes," said Sanders thoughtfully. Then he sat down on the edge of the sty, and looked long and silently at an empty bucket. But whether his thoughts were of Tino Head's Bell, whom he had lost forever, or of the food the farmer fed his pig on, is not known. "Lord preserve us! Are ye no at the kirk?" cried Bell, nearly dropping the baby as Samuel broke into the room. "Bell!" cried Samuel. Then Tino Head's Bell knew that her hour had come. "Samuel," she faltered. "Will ye hae us, Bell?" demanded Samuel, glaring at her sheepishly. "Aye," answered Bell. Samuel fell into a chair. "Bring us a drink o' water, Bell," he said. But Bell thought the occasion required milk, and there was none in the kitchen. She went out to the byre, still with the baby in her arms, and saw Sanders Elshioner sitting gloomily on the pigsty. "Weel, Bell," said Sanders. "I thought ye'd been at the kirk, Sanders," said Bell. Then there was a silence between them. "Has Samuel speared ye, Bell?" asked Sanders stolidly. "Aye," said Bell again, and this time there was a tear in her eye. Sanders was little better than an Ara man, and Samuel was a weaver, and yet, but it was too late now. Sanders gave the pig a vicious poke with the stick, and when it had ceased to grunt, Bell was back in the kitchen. She had forgotten about the milk, however, and Samuel only got water after all. In after days, when the story of Bell's wooing was told, there were some who held that the circumstances would have almost justified the lassie in giving Samuel the go-by. But these perhaps forgot that her other lover was in the same predicament as the accepted one, that of the two. Indeed, he was the more to blame, for he set off to Tino Head on the Sabbath of his own accord, while Samuel only ran after him. And then there is no one to say for certain whether Bell heard of her suitor's delinquencies until Lisbeth's return from the kirk. Samuel could never remember whether he told her, and Bell was not sure whether, if he did, she took it in. Sanders was greatly in demand for weeks to tell what he knew of the affair, but though he was twice asked to tea to the manse among the trees, and subjected thereafter to ministerial cross-examinations, this is all he told. He remained at the pigsty until Samuel left the farm, when he joined him at the top of the brae, and they went home together. "It's yourself, Sanders," said Samuel. "It is so, Samuel," said Sanders. "Very called," said Samuel. "Bly," assented Sanders. After a pause, "Samuel," said Sanders. "Aye. I'm hearing ye're to be married." "Aye. Weel, Samuel, she's a snod bit lassie." "Thank ye," said Samuel. "I had ance a kin o' notion o' Bell Missile," continued Sanders. "Ye had?" "Yes, Samuel, but I thocht better o' tea." "Who do ye mean?" asked Samuel, a little anxiously. "Weel, Samuel, marriage is a terrible responsibility." "It is so," said Samuel, wincing. "And no the thing to tack up wid hoot consideration. But it's a blessed and honorable state, Sanders. Ye've heard the minister on tea. They say," continued the relentless Sanders, "at the minister doesna get on sair why the wife himsel dot." "So they do," cried Samuel, with a sinking at the heart. "I've been telt," Sanders went on, "at gin ye can get the upper han o' the wife for a while at first, there's the mair chance o' a harmonious existence." "Bell's no the lassie," said Samuel, appealingly, "to thwart her man." Sanders smiled. Do ye think she is, Sanders? Weel, Sam'el, I do not want to fluster ye, but she's been our lang while Lisbeth Fargus no to hae learned her ways. And a body kins what a life Tino head has wy her. Guid sake, Sanders, who did ye know speak o' this afore? I thought ye kent O.T. Sam'el. They had now reached the square, and the U.P. Kirk was coming out. The Auld Licht Kirk would be half an hour yet. But Sanders, said Sam'el, brightening up, you was on your WY to spear her yersel dot. I was, Sam'el, said Sanders, and I canna but be thankful you was our quick for S. Jinty hadna been you, said Sam'el, I would never hae thocht O.T. I'm saying nathing agin Bell, pursued the other. But man, Sam'el, a body should be mair deliberate in a thing o' the kind. It was michty hurried, said Sam'el waffily. It's a serious thing to spear a lassie, said Sanders. It's an awfu' thing, said Sam'el. But we'll hope for the best, added Sanders in a hopeless voice. They were close to the tenements now, and Sam'el looked as if he were on his way to be hanged. Sam'el! Aye, Sanders. Did ye kiss her, Sam'el? Nah. Who? Theirs was vera little time, Sanders. Half an hour, said Sanders. Was there? Man, Sanders, to tell you the truth, I never thocht O.T. Then the soul of Sanders Elshioner was filled with contempt for Sam'el Dickey. The scandal blew over. At first it was expected that the minister would interfere to prevent the union, but beyond intimating from the pulpit that the souls of Sabbath breakers were beyond praying for, and then praying for Sam'el and Sanders at great length, with a word thrown in for Bell, he let things take their course. Some said it was because he was always frightened lest his young men should intermarry with other denominations, but Sanders explained it differently to Sam'el. I have not a word to say agin the minister, he said. They're grand prayers, but Sam'el, he's a merit man himsel dot. He's a the better for that, Sanders, isna he? Do ye no see? Asked Sanders, compassionately. At he's trying to mak the best O.T.? Oh, Sanders, man, said Sam'el. Cheer up, Sam'el, said Sanders. It'll soon be our. Their having been rival suitors had not interfered with their friendship. On the contrary, while they had hitherto been mere acquaintances, they became inseparables as the wedding day drew near. It was noticed that they had much to say to each other, and that when they could not get a room to themselves they wandered about together in the churchyard. When Sam'el had anything to tell Bell he sent Sanders to tell it, and Sanders did as he was bid. There was nothing that he would not have done for Sam'el. The more obliging Sanders was, however, the sadder Sam'el grew. He never laughed now on Saturdays, and sometimes his loom was silent half the day. Sam'el felt that Sanders was the kindness of a friend for a dying man. It was to be a penny wedding, and Lisbeth Fargus said it was the delicacy that made Sam'el superintend the fitting up of the barn by deputy. Once he came to see it in person, but he looked so ill that Sanders had to see him home. This was on the Thursday afternoon, and the wedding was fixed for Friday. Sanders, said Sam'el, in a voice strangely unlike his own. It'll be hour by this time the morn. It will, said Sanders. If I had only kent her langer, continued Sam'el, it would hae been safer, said Sanders. Did ye see the yallow floor in Bell's bonnet? Asked the accepted swain. Aye, said Sanders reluctantly. I'm Sir Dootin she's but a flichty, light-hearted critter after a dot. I had my suspicions O.T., said Sanders. Ye hae kent her langer than me, said Sam'el. Yes, said Sanders, but there's nae getting at the heart o' women. Man, Sam'el, they're desperate cunnin' dot. I'm Sir Dootin. It'll be a warning to ye, Sam'el, no to be in sic a hurry I the future, said Sanders. Sam'el groaned. You'll be gained up to the manse to arrange why the minister the mornin', continued Sanders in a subdued voice. Sam'el looked wistfully at his friend. I canna do tea, Sanders, he said. I canna do tea. Ye maun, said Sanders. It's aisy to speak, retorted Sam'el bitterly. We have our troubles, Sam'el, said Sanders soothingly, and every man maun bear his ain burdens. Johnny Davy's wife's dead, and he's no reppin' in dot. Aye, said Samuel, but a death's no a marriage. We hae hen deaths in our family too. It may a be for the best, added Sanders, and there would be a michty talk I the hale countryside gin ye didna jing to the minister like a man. I maun hae langer to think o' tea, said Samuel. Bell's marriage is the morn, said Sanders, decisively. Samuel glanced up with a wild look in his eyes. Sanders, he cried. Samuel! Ye hae been a guid friend to me, Sanders, in this sair affliction. Nothing ava, said Sanders. Don't mention dee. But Sanders, ye canna deny but what your rinnin' o the kirk that awfu' day was at the bottom o da dot. It was so, said Sanders bravely. And ye used to be fond o' Bell, Sanders. I dinna deny tea. Sanders, laddie, said Samuel, bending forward and speaking in a wheedling voice. I thocht it was you she like it. I had some sick idea missile, said Sanders. Sanders, I canna think to pair TWA Falk SAE will suited to on either as you and Bell. Canna ye, Samuel? She would mak ye a guid wife, Sanders. I hae studied her weel, and she's a thrifty, dous, clever lassie. Sanders, there's no the like o' her. Mony a time, Sanders, I hae said to Missile, there's a lass ony man micht be prud to tak dot a body says the same, Sanders. There's nae risk ava man, nane to speak o'. Tak her, laddie, tak her, Sanders, it's a grand chance, Sanders. She's yours for the spearin'. I'll gie her up, Sanders. Will ye, though? Said Sanders. What do ye think? Asked Samuel. If ye would rather, said Sanders politely. There's my han on tea, said Samuel. Bless ye, Sanders, ye've been a true friend to me. Then they shook hands for the first time in their lives, and soon afterwards Sanders struck up the braid to Tino Head. Next morning Sanders Elshioner, who had been very busy the night before, put on his Sabbath clothes and strolled up to the manse. But where is Samuel? Asked the minister. I must see himself. It's a new arrangement, said Sanders. What do you mean, Sanders? Bell's to marry me, explained Sanders. But what does Samuel say? He's willin', said Sanders. And Bell? She's willin' too. She prefers tea. It is unusual, said the minister. It's a richt, said Sanders. Well, you know best, said the minister. You see the whose was ta'en, at ony rate, continued Sanders. And I'll just jing until tea instead o' Samuel. Quite so. And I couldna think to disappoint the lassie. Your sentiments do you credit, Sanders, said the minister. But I hope you do not enter upon the blessed state of matrimony without full consideration of its responsibilities. It is a serious business, marriage. It's a that, said Sanders, but I'm willin' to stand the risk. So, as soon as it could be done, Sanders Elshioner took to wife Tino Head's Bell, and I remember seeing Samuel Dickey trying to dance at the penny wedding. Years afterward it was said in Thrums that Samuel had treated Bell badly, but he was never sure about it himself. It was a near thing, a michty near thing, he admitted in the square. They say, some other weaver would remark, "At it was you Bell liked best." I do not kin, Samuel would reply. But there's nae doot the lassie was fell fond o' me, o' you, a mere passin' fancy, as ye micht say. The heather lint I. By S. R. Crockett. Janet Balcristy lived in a little cottage at the back of the long wood of Barbracks. She had been a hard-working woman all her days, for her mother died when she was but young, and she had lived on, keeping her father's house by the side of the single-track railway line. Gavin Balcristy was a foreman plate-layer on the PPR, and with 2 men under him, had charge of a section of 3 miles. He lived just where that distinguished but impecunious line plunges into a moss-covered granite wilderness of moor and bog, where there is not more than a shepherd's hut to the half-dozen miles, and where the passage of a train is the occasion of commotion among scattered groups of black-faced sheep. Gavin Balcristy's 3 miles of PPR metals gave him little work, but a good deal of healthy exercise. the black-faced sheep breaking down the fences and straying on the line's side, and the torrents coming down the granite gullies, foaming white after a waterspout, and tearing into his embankments, undermining his chairs and plates, were the only troubles of his life. There was, however, a little public house at the huts, which in the old days of construction had had the license, and which had lingered alone, license and all, when its immediate purpose in life had been fulfilled, because there was nobody but the whelps and the railway officials on the passing trains to object to its continuance. Now it is cold and blowy on the Westland moors, and neither whelps nor dark blue uniforms object to a little refreshment up there. The mischief was that Gavin Balcrusty did not, like the guards and engine drivers, go on with the passing train. He was always on the spot, and the path through Barbrax Wood to the railway inn was as well trodden as that which led over the bog moss, where the whelps built, to the great white viaduct of Loch Merrick, where his 3 miles of parallel gleaming responsibility began. When his wife was but newly dead, and his Janet just a smart elf-locked lassie running to and from the school, Gavin got too much in the way of slippin' doon by. When Janet grew to be woman muckle, Gavin kept the habit, and Janet hardly knew that it was not the use and wont of all fathers to sidle down to a contiguous railway arms, and return some hours later with uncertain step, and face pricked out with bright pinpoints of red, the sure mark of the confirmed drinker of whiskey neat. They were long days in the cottage at the back of Barbrax Longwood. The little Button Bent was whitewashed till it dazzled the eyes as you came over the brae to it, and found it set against the solemn depths of dark green firwood. From early morn, when she saw her father off, till the dusk of the day, when he would return for his supper, Janet Balcrusty saw no human being. She heard the muffled roar of the trains through the deep cutting at the back of the wood, but she herself was entirely out of sight of the carriagefuls of travellers whisking past within half a mile of her solitude and meditation. Janet was what is called a through-gone lass, and her work for the day was often over by 8 o'clock in the morning. Janet grew to womanhood without a sweetheart. She was plain, and she looked plainer than she was in the dresses which she made for herself by the light of nature, and what she could remember of the current fashions at Merrick Kirk, to which she went every alternate Sunday. Her father and she took day about. Wet or shine, she tramped to Merrick Kirk, even when the rain blattered and the wind raved and bleated alternately among the pines of the long wood of Barbrax. Her father had a simpler way of spending his day out. He went down to the railway inn and drank ginger beer all day with the landlord. Ginger beer is an unsteadying beverage when taken the day by the length. Also, the man who drinks it steadily and quietly never enters on any inheritance of length of days. So it came to pass that one night Gavin Balcrusty did not come home at all, at least, not till he was brought lying comfortably on the door of a disused third-class carriage, which was now seeing out its career anchored under the bank at Loch Merrick, where Gavin had used it as a shelter. The driver of the 6:50 up train had seen him walking soberly along toward the huts, and the railway inn, letting his long surface man's hammer fall against the rail keys occasionally as he walked. He saw him bend once, as though his keen ear detected a false ring in a loose length between 2 plates. This was the last that was seen of him till the driver of the 9:37 down express, the boat train, as the employees of the PPR call it, with a touch of respect in their voices, passed Gavin fallen forward on his face just when he was flying down grade under a full head of steam. It was duskily clear, with a great lake of crimson light dying into purple over the hills of midsummer heather. The driver was John Platt, the Englishman from Crewe, who had been brought from the Great London and North Western Railway, locally known as the LNW. In these remote railway circles the talk is as exclusively of matters of the 4-foot way as in Crewe or Derby. There is an inspector of traffic, whose portly presence now graces Carlisle station, who left the PPR in these sad days of amalgamation, because he could not endure to see so many west wagons passing over the sacred metals of the PPR permanent way. From his youth he had been trained in a creed of 2 articles: to swear by the PPR through thick and thin, and hate the apple green of the west. It was as much as he could do to put up with the sight of the abominations. To have to hunt for their trucks when they got astray was more than mortal could stand, so he fled the land. So when they stopped the express for Gavin Balcrusty, every man on the line felt that it was an honor to the dead. John Platt sent a gurring thrill through the train as he put his brakes hard down and whistled for the guard. He, thinking that the Merrick Viaduct was down at least, twirled his brake to such purpose that the rear car progressed along the metals by a series of convulsive bounds. Then they softly ran back, and there lay Gavin fallen forward on his knees, as though he had been trying to rise, or had knelt down to pray. Let him have the benefit of the doubt. In this world. In the next, if all tales be true, there is no such thing. So Janet Balcrusty dwelt alone in the white button bed, at the back of the long wood of Barbrax. The factor gave her notice, but the laird, who was not accounted by his neighbours to be very wise, because he did needlessly kind things, told the factor to let the lassie bide, and delivered to herself with his own handwriting to the effect that Janet Balcrusty, in consideration of her lonely condition, was to be allowed the house for her lifetime, a cow's grass, and £30 sterling in the year as a charge on the estate. He drove down the cow himself, and having stalled it in the byre, he informed her of the fact over the yard dyke by word of mouth, for he never could be induced to enter her door. He was accounted to be gay and queer, save by those who had tried making a bargain with him. But his farmers liked him, knowing him to be an easy man with those who had been really unfortunate, for he knew to what the year's crops of each had amounted, to a single chalder and head of knout. Deep in her heart Janet Balcrusty cherished a great ambition. When the earliest blackbird awoke and began to sing, while it was yet grey twilight, Janet would be up and at her work. She had an ambition to be a great poet. No less than this would serve her. But not even her father had known, and no other had any chance of knowing. In the black leather chest, which had been her mother's, upstairs, there was a slowly growing pile of manuscript, and the editor of the local paper received every other week a poem, longer or shorter, for his Poet's Corner, in an envelope with the New Dowry postmark. He was an obliging editor, and generally gave the closely written manuscript to the senior office boy, who had passed the 6th standard, to cut down, tinker the rhymes, and lope any superfluity of feet. The senior office boy just spread himself, as he said, and delighted to do the job in style. But there was a woman fading into a grey old maidishness which had hardly ever been girlhood, who did not at all approve of these corrections. She endured them because over the signature of Heather Bell, it was a joy to see in the rich, close luxury of type her own poetry, even though it might be a trifle tattered and tossed about by hands ruthless and alien, those, in fact, of the senior office boy. Janet walked every other week to the post office at New Dowry to post her letters to the editor, but neither the great man nor yet the senior office boy had any conception that the verses of their esteemed correspondent were written by a woman too early old who dwelt alone at the back of Barbrax Longwood. One day Janet took a sudden but long meditated journey. She went down by rail from the little station of the Huts to the large town of Drum, 30 miles to the east. Here, with the most perfect courage and dignity of bearing, she interviewed a printer and arranged for the publication of her poems in their own original form, no longer staled and clapper-clawed by the pencil of the senior office boy. When the proof sheets came to Janet, she had no way of indicating the corrections but by again writing the whole poem out in a neat print hand on the edge of the proof, and underscoring the words which were to be altered. This, when you think of it, is a very good way, when the happiest part of your life is to be spent in such concrete pleasures of hope, as Janet's were over the crackly sheets of the printer of Drum. Finally the book was produced, a small rather thickish octavo, on sufficiently wretched grey paper which had suffered from want of thorough washing in the original paper mill. It was bound in a peculiarly deadly blue, of a rectified reckitt tint, which gave you dazzles in the eye at any distance under 10 paces. Janet had selected this as the most appropriate of colors. She had also many years ago decided upon the title, so that Reckitt had printed upon it, back and side, the Heather Lintai, while inside there was the acknowledgment of authorship, which Janet felt to be a solemn duty to the world. Poems by Janet Balcrusty, Barbrax Cottage, by New Dowry. First she had thought of withholding her name and style, but on the whole, after the most prolonged consideration, she felt that she was not justified in bringing about such a controversy as divided Scotland concerning that great unknown, who wrote the Waverley novels. Almost every second or third day Janet trod that long lochside road to New Dowry for her proof sheets, and returned them on the morrow corrected in her own way. Sometimes she got a lift from some farmer or carter, for she had worn herself with anxiety to the shadow of what she had once been, and her dry bleached hair became grey and greyer with the fervor of her devotion to letters. By April the book was published, and at the end of this month, laid aside by sickness of the vague kind called locally a decline, she took to her bed, rising only to lay a few sticks upon the fire from her store gathered in the autumn, or to brew herself a cup of tea. She waited for the tokens of her book's conquests in the great world of thought and men. She had waited so long for her recognition, and now it was coming. She felt that it would not be long before she was recognized as one of the singers of the world. Indeed, had she but known it, her recognition was already on its way. In a great city of the north, a clever young reporter was cutting open the leaves of the Heatherland Tie, with a hand almost feverishly eager. "This is a perfect treasure. This is a find indeed. Here is my chance ready to my hand." His paper was making a specialty of exposures. If there was anything weak and erring, anything particularly helpless and foolish which could make no stand for itself, the Night Hawk was on the pounce. Hitherto the junior reporter had never had a two-column chance. He had read, it was not much that he had read, Macaulay's two famous articles on Satan, Montgomery, and, not knowing that Macaulay lived to regret the spirit of that assault, he felt that if he could bring down the Night Hawk on the Heatherland Tie, his fortune was made. So he sat down and he wrote, not knowing and not regarding a lonely woman's heart, to whom his word would be as the word of a god, in the lonely cottage lying in the lee of the long wood of Barbrax. The junior reporter turned out a triumph of the new journalism. "This is a book which may be a genuine source of pride to every native of the ancient province of Galloway," he wrote. "Galloway has been celebrated for black cattle and for wool, as also for a certain bucolic belatedness of temperament, but Galloway has never hitherto produced a poetess. One has arisen in the person of Miss Janet Ball, something or other. We have not an interpreter at hand, and so cannot wrestle with the intricacies of the authoress's name, which appears to be some Galwegian form of Erse or Choctaw. Miss Ball, and so forth, has a true fount of pathos and humor. In what touching language she chronicles the death of two young lambs which fell down into one of the puddles they call rivers down there, and were either drowned or choked with the dirt. How touchingly simple," continued the junior reporter, buckling up his sleeves to enjoy himself, and feeling himself born to be a Saturday reviewer. Mark the local color, the wool and the dirty water of the Dee, without doubt a name applied to one of their bigger ditches down there. Mark also the over-fervency of the touching line, which, but for the sex of the writer and her evident genius, might be taken for an expression of a strength hardly permissible even in the metropolis. The junior reporter filled his two columns and enjoyed himself in the doing of it. He concluded with the words, "The authoress will make a great success. If she will come to the capital, where genius is always appreciated, she will, without doubt, make her fortune. Nay, if Miss Ball, but again we cannot proceed for the want of an interpreter, if Miss B, we say, will only accept a position at Cleary's waxworks and give readings from her poetry, or exhibit herself in the act of pronouncing her own name, she will be a greater draw in this city than Punch and Judy, or even the latest American advertising evangelist, who preaches standing on his head." The junior reporter ceased here from very admiration at his own cleverness in so exactly hitting the tone of the masters of his craft, and handed his manuscript in to the editor. It was the gloaming of a long June day when Rob Affleck, the woodman over at Barbrax, having been at New Dowry with a cart of wood, left his horse on the roadside and ran over through Gavin's old short cut, now seldom used, to Janet's cottage with a paper in a yellow wrapper. "Leave it on the step, and thank you kindly, Rob," said a weak voice within, and Rob, anxious about his horse and his bed, did so without another word. In a moment or two Janet crawled to the door, listened to make sure that Rob was really gone, opened the door, and protruded a hand wasted to the hard, flat bone, an arm that ought for years to have been full of flesh and noble curves. When Janet got back to bed, it was too dark to see anything except the big printing at the top of the paper. 2 columns of it, said Janet, with great thankfulness in her heart, lifting up her soul to God who had given her the power to sing. She strained her prematurely old and weary eyes to make out the sense. A genuine source of pride to every native of the ancient province, she read. The Lord be praised, said Janet, in a rapture of devout thankfulness. Though I never really doubted it, she added, as though asking pardon for a moment's distrust. But I tried to write these poems to the glory of God and not to my own praise, and He will accept them and keep me humble under the praise of men as well as under their neglect. So, clutching the precious paper close to her breast, and letting tears of thankfulness fall on the article, which, had they fallen on the head of the junior reporter, would have burned like fire, she patiently awaited the coming dawn. I can wait till the morning now to read the rest, she said. So hour after hour, with her eyes wide, staring hard at the gray window squares, she waited the dawn from the east. About 2:30 there was a stirring and a moaning among the pines, and the roar of the sudden gust came with the breaking day through the dark arches. In the whirlwind there came a strange expectancy and tremor into the heart of the poetess, and she pressed the wet sheet of crumpled paper closer to her bosom, and turned to face the light. Through the spaces of the long wood of barbracks there came a shining visitor, the angel of the presence, he who comes but once and stands a moment with a beckoning finger. Him she followed up through the wood. They found Janet on the morning of the second day after, with a look so glad on her face, and so natural an expectation in the unclosed eye, that Rob Affleck spoke to her and expected an answer. The night hawk was clasped to her breast with a hand that they could not loosen. It went to the grave with her body. The ink had run a little here and there, where the tears had fallen thickest. God is more merciful than man. A Doctor of the Old School, by Ian McLaren. See also the illustrated HTML version, number 9320. I. General Practitioner. Drumtakti was accustomed to break every law of health, except wholesome food and fresh air, and yet had reduced the psalmist's furthest limit to an average life rate. Our men made no difference in their clothes for summer or winter, Drumshug and 1 or 2 of the larger farmers condescending to a top coat on Sabbath, as a penalty of their position, and without regard to temperature. They wore their blacks at a funeral, refusing to cover them with anything, out of respect to the deceased, and standing longest in the kirkyard when the north wind was blowing across 100 miles of snow. If the rain was pouring at the junction, then Drumtakti stood 2 minutes longer through sheer native dourness till each man had a cascade from the tail of his coat, and hazarded the suggestion, halfway to Kildrummy, that it had been a bit scrowy, and scrowy, being as far short of a shower as a shower, fell below wheat. This sustained defiance of the elements provoked occasional judgments in the shape of a host cough, and the head of the house was then exhorted by his women folk to change his feet, if he had happened to walk through a burn on his way home, and was pestered generally with sanitary precautions. It is right to add that the Goodman treated such advice with contempt, regarding it as suitable for the effeminacy of towns, but not seriously intended for Drumtakti. Sandy Stewart napped, stones on the road in his shirt sleeves, wet or fair, summer and winter, till he was persuaded to retire from active duty at 85, and he spent 10 years more in regretting his hastiness and criticizing his successor. The ordinary course of life, with fine air and contented minds, was to do a full share of work till 70, and then to look after our jobs well into the 80s, and to slip out within sight of 90. Persons above 90 were understood to be acquitting themselves with credit, and assumed airs of authority, brushing aside the opinions of 70 as immature, and confirming their conclusions with illustrations drawn from the end of last century. When Hillix's brother so far forgot himself as to slip out at 60, that worthy man was scandalized, and offered labored explanations at the burial. It's an awfu' business ony why ye look at it, and a sair trial to us I never heard tell of sic a thing in our family afore, and it es no easy accountin' for tea. The goodwife was sayin' he was never the same sin a wheat nicht he lost himsel on the muir and slept below a bush, but that's either here nor there. I am thinking he sapped his constitution they twa years he west grieve aboot England. That was 30 years syne, but yeary never the same after they foreign climates. Drumtochty listened patiently to Hillix's apologia, but was not satisfied. It's clean havers aboot the muir. Losh keeps, we've a sleep at OT and never been a hair the war. I admit that England micht hae doon the job, it's no kenny stravagin yon wy frae place to place, but Drums never complained to me as if he had been nippit in the sooth. The parish had, in fact, lost confidence in Drums after his wayward experiment with a potato-digging machine, which turned out a lamentable failure, and his premature departure confirmed our vague impression of his character. He's awa no, Drumshug summed up, after opinion had time to form. And there were war folk than Drums, but there's nae doot he was a wee flichty. When illness had the audacity to attack a Drumtochty man, it was described as a whup, and was treated by the men with a fine negligence. Hillix was sitting in the post office one afternoon when I looked in for my letters, and the right side of his face was blazing red. His subject of discourse was the prospects of the turnip breer, but he casually explained that he was waiting for medical advice. The good wife is keepin' up a ding-dong frae mornin' till nicht aboot ma face, and a am fair deafened, so a am watchin' for McClure to get a bottle as he comes wast. Yance him no. The doctor made his diagnosis from horseback on sight, and stated the result with that admirable clearness which endeared him to Drumtochty. Confound ye, Hillix, what are ye ploiterin' aboot here for in the wheat why a face like a boiled beer? Div ye no ken that ye be a techo the rose, erysipelas, and octave be in the who's? Gie hane why ye afore a leave the bit, and send a half flin for some medicine. Ye donnered idiot, are ye etlin te follow Drums afore your time? And the medical attendant of Drumtochty continued his invective till Hillix started, and still pursued his retreating figure with medical directions of a simple and practical character. I am watchin', and peety ye if ye pit have time. Keep your bed the mornin', and dinna show your face in the fields till a see ye. I'll gie ye a cry on Monday, sick and auld fuel, but there's no ane o' them te mine on either in the hale parish. Hillix's wife informed the kirkyard that the doctor gied the goodman an awful clearin', and that Hillix was keepin' the who's, which meant that the patient had tea breakfast, and at that time was wandering about the farm buildings in an easy undress, with his head in a plaid. It was impossible for a doctor to earn even the most modest competence from a people of such scandalous health, and so McClure had annexed neighboring parishes. His house, little more than a cottage, stood on the roadside among the pines toward the head of our glen, and from this base of operations he dominated the wild glen that broke the wall of the Grampians above Drumtochty, where the snowdrifts were 12 feet deep in winter, and the only way of passage at times was the channel of the river, and the moorland district westward till he came to the Dunleith sphere of influence, where there were 4 doctors and a hydropathic. Drumtochty in its length, which was 8 miles, and its breadth, which was 4, lay in his hand, besides a glen behind, unknown to the world, which in the night time he visited at the risk of life, for the way thereto was across the big moor with its peat holes and treacherous bogs. And he held the land eastward toward Muirtown so far as Geordie. The Drumtochty post travelled every day, and could carry word that the doctor was wanted. He did his best for the need of every man, woman, and child in this wild, straggling district, year in, year out, in the snow and in the heat, in the dark and in the light, without rest, and without holiday for 40 years. One horse could not do the work of this man, but we liked best to see him on his old white mare, who died the week after her master, and the passing of the two did our hearts good. It was not that he rode beautifully, for he broke every canon of art, flying with his arms, stooping till he seemed to be speaking into Jess's ears, and rising in the saddle beyond all necessity. But he could ride faster, stay longer in the saddle, and had a firmer grip with his knees than any one I ever met, and it was all for mercy's sake. When the reapers in harvest time saw a figure whirling past in a cloud of dust, or the family at the foot of Glen Urtac, gathered round the fire on a winter's night, heard the rattle of a horse's hoofs on the road, or the shepherds, out after the sheep, traced a black speck moving across the snow to the upper glen, they knew it was the doctor, and without being conscious of it, wished him Godspeed. Before and behind his saddle were strapped the instruments and medicines the doctor might want, for he never knew what was before him. There were no specialists in drumtachty, so this man had to do everything as best he could, and as quickly. He was chest doctor, and doctor for every other organ as well. He was accoucheur and surgeon. He was oculist and aurist. He was dentist and chloroformist, besides being chemist and druggist. It was often told how he was far up Glen Urtach when the feeders of the threshing mill caught young Bunbury, and how he only stopped to change horses at his house, and galloped all the way to Bunbury, and flung himself off his horse, and amputated the arm, and saved the lad's life. You would hae thought that every minute was an hour, said Jamie Suter, who had been at the threshing. And I'll never forget the poor lad lying as white as death on the floor o' the loft, wi' his head on a sheaf, and Bunbury haudin' the bandage ticked and prayin' a' the while, and the mither greetin' in the corner. Will he never come? She cries, and I heard the sound o' the horse's feet on the road a mile awa in the frosty air. The Lord be praised, said Bunbury, and I slipped doon the ladder as the doctor came skelpin' into the close, the foam fleeing frae his horse's mouth. War is he? Wes o' that passed his lips, and in 5 minutes he had him on the feed-in board, and wes at his work, sick work, neebors. But he did it weel. And aething a thocht rail thochtfu o' him, he first sent aff the laddie's mither to get a bed ready. No, that's finished, and his constitution 'll dae the rest, and he carried the lad doon the ladder in his arms like a bairn, and laid him in his bed, and waits aside him till he was sleepin', and then says he, Bunbury, you're a gey lad never to say, Collie, will ye lick? For I havena tasted meat for 16 horse. It was michty to see him come into the yard that day, neebors. The vera look o' him was victory. Jamie's cynicism slipped off in the enthusiasm of this reminiscence, and he expressed the feeling of drumtachty. No one sent for McClure save in great straits, and the sight of him put courage in sinking hearts. But this was not by the grace of his appearance, or the advantage of a good bedside manner. A tall, gaunt, loosely made man, without an ounce of superfluous flesh on his body, his face burned a dark brick color by constant exposure to the weather, red hair and beard turning gray, honest blue eyes that look you ever in the face, huge hands with wrist bones like the shank of a ham, and a voice that hurled his salutations across 2 fields, he suggested the moor rather than the drawing-room. But what a clever hand it was in operation, as delicate as a woman's. And what a kindly voice it was in the humble room where the shepherd's wife was weeping by her man's bedside. He was ill pitent edgether, to begin with, but many of his physical defects were the penalties of his work, and endeared him to the glen. That ugly scar, that cut into his right eyebrow and gave him such a sinister expression, was got one night Jess slipped on the ice and laid him insensible 8 miles from home. His limp marked the big snowstorm in the 50s, when his horse missed the road in Glen Urtach, and they rolled together in a drift. McClure escaped with a broken leg and the fracture of 3 ribs, but he never walked like other men again. He could not swing himself into the saddle without making 2 attempts and holding Jess's mane. Neither can you, warsel, through the peat bogs and snow drifts for 40 winters without a touch of rheumatism. But they were honorable scars, and for such risks of life men get the Victoria Cross in other fields. McClure got nothing but the secret affection of the glen, which knew that none had ever done 1/10 as much for it as this ungainly, twisted, battered figure, and I have seen a drumtachty face soften at the sight of McClure limping to his horse. Mr. Hops earned the ill will of the glen forever by criticizing the doctor's dress, but indeed it would have filled any townsman with amazement. Black he wore once a year, on Sacrament Sunday, and if possible, at a funeral, top coat or waterproof never. His jacket and waistcoat were rough homespun of Glen Urtach wool, which threw off the wet like a duck's back, and below he was clad in shepherd's tartan trousers, which disappeared into unpolished riding boots. His shirt was grey flannel, and he was uncertain about a collar, but certain as to a tie, which he never had, his beard doing instead, and his hat was soft felt of 4 colors and 7 different shapes. His point of distinction in dress was the trousers, and they were the subject of unending speculation. Some threep that he's worn the identical pair the last 20 year, and a mind muscle him getting a tir a hint, when he was crossin' Ur Palin, and the men's still visible. Ithers declare 'at he's got a wab o' claith, and he's a new pair made in Newtown aince in the TWA year maybe, and keeps them in the garden till the new look wears af. For mine pairt, Suitor used to declare, I canna mak up my mind, but there's ae thing sure, the Glen wadna like to see him would hoot them, it would be a shock to confidence. There's no muckle o' the check left, but ye can I tell it, and when ye see they breeks comin' and ye ken that if human poor can save your bairn's life it'll be doon. The confidence of the Glen, and the tributary states, was unbounded, and rested partly on long experience of the doctor's resources, and partly on his hereditary connection. His father was here afore him. Mrs. McFadden used to explain. Atween them they've had the countryside for weel on a century. If McClure disna understand your constitution, wha dis, I would like to ask? For Drumtochty had its own constitution and a special throat disease, as became a parish which was quite self-contained between the woods and the hills, and not dependent on the lowlands either for its diseases or its doctors. He's a skilly man, Dr. McClure, continued my friend Mrs. McFadden, whose judgment on sermons or anything else was seldom at fault. And a kind-hearted, though o' course he's his faults like us and he disna tribble the kirk often. I can tell what's wrong wi' a body, and macely he can put ye richt, and there's nae new-fangled wysy him. A blister for the outside and Epsom salts for the inside dis his work, and they say there's no an herb on the hills he disna ken. If we're tae dee, we're tae dee, and if we're tae live, we're tae live, concluded Elspeth, with sound Calvinistic logic. But I'll say this for the doctor, that, whether you're tae live or dee, he can I keep up a sharp moisture on the skin. But he's no vera civil gin ye bring him when there's Nathan Rang. And Mrs. McFadden's face reflected another of Mr. Hops's misadventures of which Hillocks held the copyright. Hops's laddie ate grossarts, gooseberries, till they had to sit up and ichtwy him, and Nathan would do but they mom hey the doctor, and he writes immediately on a slip o' paper. Weel, McClure had been awa and ichtwy a shepherd's wife Dunleith wy, and he comes here wid hood drawin' bridle, mud up tae the een. What's 80 here, Hillocks? He cries, it's no an accident, is 't? And when he got off his horse he could hardly stand why stiffness and tire. It's non o us, doctor, it's Hops's laddie. He's been eatin' our money berries. If he didna turn on me like a tiger. Div ye mean te say. Wheesht, and I tried to quiet him, for Hops West cum in ot. Well, doctor, begins he, as brisk as a magpie, you're here at last. There's no hurry with you Scotchmen. My boy has been sick all night, and I've never had a wink of sleep. You might have come a little quicker, that's all I've got to say. We've mair tae day in Drumtochty than attend tae every bairn that he's a sair stomach, and a saw McClure was roost. I'm astonished to hear you speak. Our doctor at home always says to Mrs. Ops, look on me as a family friend, Mrs. Ops, and send for me though it be only a headache. He'd be mair sparin' o' his offers if he had 24 mile to look after. There's Nathan Rang why your laddie but greed. Gie him a good dose o' castor oil and stop his meat for a day, and he'll be a rick the morn. He'll not take castor oil, doctor. We have given up those barbarous medicines. Whatna kind o' medicines hae ye know in the sooth? Well, you see, Dr. McClure, we're homeopathists, and I've my little chest here, and O.T. Hops comes why his boxy. Let's see tea, and McClure sits doon and tacks O.T. the bit bottles, and he reads the names why a loch every time. Belladonna, did ye ever hear the like? Aconite, it causa. Nux vomica. What next? Weel, ma Manny, he says te Hops, it's a fine ploy, and ye'll better gang on why the nux till it's doon, and gie him ony ither o' the sweeties he fancies. No, o Hillocks, a mon be aft te see Drumshoog's grieve, for he's doon why the fever, and it's te be a took fecht. A hinna time to wait for dinner, gie me some cheese and cake in ma hond, and Jess'll take a pail o' meal and water. Fee? I'm no wanting your fees, man. Why that boxy ye dinna need a doctor. Nah, gie your siller tae some poor body, Maister Hops, and he was doon the road as hard as he could lick. His fees were pretty much what the folk chose to give him, and he collected them once a year at Kildrummy Fair. Weel, doctor, what am a win ye for the wife and bairn? Ye'll need 3 notes for that nick ye stayed in the hoosen of the Vessets. Havers? McClure would answer. Prices are low, herein, gis 30 shillings. No, no, or the wife'll tack Myers af. And it was settled for £2. Lord Kilspindy gave him a free house and fields, and one way or other, Drumshoot told me the doctor might get in about £150 a year, out of which he had to pay his old housekeeper's wages and a boy's, and keep 2 horses, besides the cost of instruments and books, which he bought through a friend in Edinburgh with much judgment. There was only one man who ever complained of the doctor's charges, and that was the new farmer of Milton, who was so good that he was above both churches, and held a meeting in his barn. It was Milton the Glen supposed at first to be a Mormon, but I can't go into that now. He offered McClure £1 less than he asked, and 2 tracts, whereupon McClure expressed his opinion of Milton, both from a theological and social standpoint, with such vigor and frankness that an attentive audience of Drumtochty men could hardly contain themselves. Jamie Suter was selling his pig at the time, and missed the meeting, but he hastened to condole with Milton, who was complaining everywhere of the doctor's language. Ye did ricte resist him, it'll maybe roost the Glen te mac a stand, he fair hands them in bondage. 30 shillings for 12 Vessets, and him no mair than 7 mile awa, and telt there werena mair than 4 at nicht. Ye'll hae the sympathy o' the Glen, for a body kens ye're as free why ye're siller as your tracks. West he beware o' good works ye offered him. Man, ye chose it weel, for he's been collectin' sae money they 40 years, I am feared for him. A thee often thocht your doctor's little better than the Good Samaritan, and the Pharisees didna think muckle o' his chance ate her in this world or that which is to come. 2 Through the flood. Dr. McClure did not lead a solemn procession from the sickbed to the dining room, and give his opinion from the hearthrug with an air of wisdom bordering on the supernatural, because either the Drumtochty houses nor his manners were on that large scale. He was accustomed to deliver himself in the yard, and to conclude his directions with 1 foot in the stirrup. But when he left the room where the life of Annie Mitchell was ebbing slowly away, our doctor said not 1 word, and at the sight of his face her husband's heart was troubled. He was a dull man, Tammas, who could not read the meaning of a sign, and labored under a perpetual disability of speech. But love was eyes to him that day, and a mouth. Is he as bad as you're lookin', doctor? Tell us the truth. Will Annie no come through? And Tammas looked McClure straight in the face, who never flinched his duty or said smooth things. I would ye onathin te say Annie has a chance, but adorna, a doot you're gain to lose her, Tammas. McClure was in the saddle, and, as he gave his judgment, he laid his hand on Tammas's shoulder with one of the rare caresses that pass between men. It's a sair business, but ye'll play the man and no vex Annie. She'll dae her best, I'll warrant. And I'll dae mine. And Tammas gave McClure's hand a grip that would have crushed the bones of a weakling. Drumtochty felt in such moments the brotherliness of this rough-looking man, and loved him. Tammas hid his face in Jess's mane, who looked round with sorrow in her beautiful eyes, for she had seen many tragedies, and in this silent sympathy the stricken man drank his cup, drop by drop. I wasna prepared for this, for I thocht she would live the langest. She's younger than me by 10 year, and never was ill. We've been married 12 year last Martinmas, but it's just like a year the day. I was never worthy o' her, the bonniest, snottest, neatest, kindliest lass in the glen. I never could mak o' te who she ever looked at me, at hesna had a word te say about her till it's hour late. She didna quist up to me that I wasna worthy o' her, know her. But I she said, your ma and Goodman, and none could be kinder te me, and I was minded te be kind, but I see no mony little trokes a micht hae doon for her, and no the time is by. Naebody kens who patient she was why me, and I made the best o' me, and never pit me te shame afore the folk. And we never had a cross word, no ane in 12 year. We were mair nor man and wife, we were sweethearts of the time. Oh, ma bonny lass, what'll the bairnies and me dae without ye, Annie? The winter night was falling fast, the snow lay deep upon the ground, and the merciless north wind moaned through the close as Tammas wrestled with his sorrow dry-eyed, for tears were denied Drumtochty men. Neither the doctor nor Jess moved hand or foot, but their hearts were with their fellow creature, and at length the doctor made a sign to Margaret Howe, who had come out in search of Tammas, and now stood by his side. Dinna mournte the bracken o' your hurt, Tammas, she said, as if Annie and you had never loved. Neither death nor time can part them that love. There's naething in a' the world sae strong as love. If Annie gies frae the sicht o' year, e'en she'll come the nearer to your hurt. She wants to see ye, and to hear ye say that ye'll never forget her nicht nor day till ye meet in the land where there's nae pardon. Oh, I ken what I'm sayin', for it's 5 year noo sin George jied awa, and he's mair wy me noo than when he was in Edinburgh and I was in Drumtachty. Thank ye kindly, Margaret. They are good words and true, and ye hev the richt to say them. But I canna day without seein' Annie comin' to meet me in the gloamin', and gain in an ode to the who's, and hearin' her say me by my name, and I'll no can tell her that I love her when there's nae Annie in the who's. Can Nathan be doon, doctor? Ye savik Flora Camille, and young Bunbray, and yon shepherd's wife Dunleith wy, and we were a sae proud o' ye, and pleased to think that ye had keep it deeth frae on either hame. Can ye no think o' something to help Annie, and gie her back her man and bairnies? And Tammas searched the doctor's face in the cold, weird light. There's nae poor in heaven or earth like love, Margaret said to me afterward. It maks the weak strong and the dumb to speak. Our hearts were as water afore Tammas's words, and I saw the doctor shake in his saddle. I never can till that mean at who he had a share in a body's grief, and carried the heaviest wecht o'er the glen. I pitied him why Tammas lookin' at him sae wistfully, as if he had the keys o' life and death in his hands. But he was honest, and wadna hold o' a false hoop to deceive a sore hurt or win a skate for himsel dot. Ye needna plead why me, Tammas, today the best a ken for your wife. Man, I kent her lang afore ye ever loved her, I brocht her into the world, and I saw her through the fever when she was a bit lassicky, I closed her mither seen, and it was me head to tell her she was an orphan, and nae man was better pleased when she got a good husband, and it helpit her why her fower bairns. A ve neither wife nor bairns o' my own, and a couldna the folk o' the Glen ma family. D'ye think I wadna save Annie if I could? If there was a man in Muirtown at could dae mair for her, I'd have him this vera nicht, but the doctors in Perthshire are helpless for this tribble. Tammas, ma poor fallow, if it could avail, I tell ye I would lay doon this auld worn o' ruckle o' a body o' mine juris to see ye baith sittin' at the fireside, and the bairns round ye, couthie and canty again. But it's nae to be, Tammas, it's nae to be. When I looked at the doctor's face, Margaret said, I thocht him the winsomest man I ever saw. He was transfigured that nicht, for I am judge and there's nae transfiguration like love. It's God's will and maun be born, but it's a sair will for me, and I am no ungrateful to you, doctor, for a ye doon and what ye said the nicht. And Tammas went back to sit with Annie for the last time. Jess picked her way through the deep snow to the main road, with a skill that came of long experience, and the doctor held converse with her according to his wont. Jess, woman, yon was the hardest work I hae to face, and I would rather hae ta'en ma chance on either row in a glen Ertak drift than tell Tammas Mitchell his wife was deein'. I said she couldna be cured, and it was true, for there's juist a man in the land fit for tea, and they micht as will try to get the mune o' heaven. I said Nathan to vex Tammas's hurt, for it's heavy enough with hoot regrets. But it's hard, Jess, that money will buy life after a, and if Annie was a duchess her man wadna lose her, but bein' only a poor cotter's wife, she maun die for the weak soot. Gin we had him the morn there's little doot she would be saved, for he hasna lost mair than 5% o' his cases, and they'll be puir toons craters, no strappin' women like Annie. It's o' the question, Jess, hurry up, lass, for we've had a heavy day. But it would be the grandest thing that was ever done in the glen in our time if it could be managed by hook or crook. We'll gang and see Drumshug, Jess. He's on either man sin Geordie who's deeth, and he was kinder than Falk Kent. And the doctor passed at a gallop through the village, whose lights shone across the white frost-bound road. Come in by, doctor, I heard ye on the road. Ye'll hae been at Tammas Mitchell's. Who's the good wife? A dude she's sober. Annie's deein' Drumshug, and Tammas is like to brack his hurt. That's no licksome, doctor, no licksome, Ava, for a dinna ken ony man in Drumtochty sae bund up in his wife as Tammas, and there's no a bonnier woman o' her age crosses oor kirk door than any, nor a cleverer at her work. Man, ye'll need to pit your brains and steep. Is she clean beyond ye? Beyond me and every ither in the land but ane, and it would cost 100 guineas to bring him to Drumtochty. Certes, he's no blate, it's a fell charge for a short day's work, but 100 or no 100 we'll hae him, and no let any gang, and her no half her years. Are ye maning it, Drumshug? And McClure turned white below the tan. William McClure, said Drumshug in one of the few confidences that ever broke the Drumtochty reserve. I am a lonely man, why naebody o' ma and blood take care for me livin', or to lift me into ma coffin when I am dead. Affect awa at Muirtown market for an extra pund on a beast, or a shillin' on the quarter o' barley, and what's the good o' tea? Ben Bray gies af to get a goon for his wife or a buke for his college laddie, and Lachlan Campbell 'll no leave the place no without a ribbon for Flora. Ilka man in the Kildrummy train has some bit farin in his pooch for the folk at hame that he's backed why the siller he won. But there's naebody to be lookin' o' tea for me, and comin' doon the road to meet me, and daffin', joking, why me a boot their farin, or feelin' ma pockets. Oh you I. I've seen it at ither hooses, though they tried to hide it frae me for fear I would lotch at them. Me lotch, why ma called, empty hame. You're the only man kens, weel that I ain't loved the noblest woman in the glen or anywhere, and I love her still, but why I neither love no. She had given her to on either, or a thought to micht hae won her, though nae man be worthy o' sic a gift. Ma her turned to bitterness, but that passed awa beside the briar bush what George who lay yon sad simmer time. Some day I'll tell ye ma story, weel for you and me are auld friends, and will be till we die. McClure felt beneath the table for Drumshug's hand, but neither man looked at the other. Weel, a week and day no, weel gin we haena mickle brightness in Urine Hames, is to keep the licht frae gain o' tea and on either voos. Write the telegram, man, and Sandy'll send it af frae Kildrummy this vera nicht, and ye'll hae your man the morn. You're the man acoon ted ye, Drumshug, but ye'll grant me a favour. Ye'll lat me pay the half, bit by bit. I ken you're woolin' te day ta, but I haena mony pleasures, and I would like te hae ma ein share in Savon Annie's life. Next morning a figure received Sir George on the Kildrummy platform, whom that famous surgeon took for a gillie, but who introduced himself as McClure of Drumtochty. It seemed as if the East had come to meet the West when these two stood together, the one in travelling furs, handsome and distinguished, with his strong, cultured face and carriage of authority, a characteristic type of his profession, and the other more marvellously dressed than ever, for Drumshug's top coat had been forced upon him for the occasion, his face and neck one redness with the bitter cold, rough and ungainly, yet not without some signs of power in his eye and voice, the most heroic type of his noble profession. McClure compassed the precious arrival with observances till he was securely seated in Drumshug's dogcart, a vehicle that lent itself to history, with 2 full-sized plaids added to his equipment. Drumshug and hillocks had both been requisitioned, and McClure wrapped another plaid round a leather case, which was placed below the seat with such reverence as might be given to the Queen's regalia. Peter attended their departure full of interest, and as soon as they were in the fir woods McClure explained that it would be an eventful journey. It's a richten here, for the wind disna get at the snow, but the drifts are deep in the glen, and shall be some engineering afore we get to your destination. 4 times they left the road and took their way over fields. Twice they forced a passage through a slap in a dike. Thrice they used gaps in the paling which McClure had made on his downward journey. I selected the road this morning, and I ken the depth to an inch. We'll get through this steadin' here to the main road, but our worst job 'll be crossin' the Tochty. Ye see, the bridge he's been shaken why this winter's flood, and we dorna venture on it, we hev tae ford, and the snaw's been meltin' up our tackway. There's nae doot the water's gae big, and it's threatenin' to rise, but we'll win through why a warsel. It micht be safer to lift the instruments to reach o' the water. Would ye mind headin' them on your knee till we're hour, and keep firm in your seat in case we come on a stain in the bed o' the river? By this time they had come to the edge, and it was not a cheering sight. The Tochty had spread out over the meadows, and while they waited they could see it cover another 2 inches on the trunk of a tree. There are summer floods, when the water is brown and flecked with foam, but this was a winter flood, which is black and sullen, and runs in the center with a strong, fierce, silent current. Upon the opposite side Hillock stood to give directions by word and hand, as the ford was on his land, and none knew the Takti better in all its ways. They passed through the shallow water without mishap, save when the wheel struck a hidden stone or fell suddenly into a rut, but when they neared the body of the river McClure halted, to give Jess a minute's breathing. "It'll tak ye a year time, lass, and I would rather be on your back, but ye never failed me yet, and a woman's life is hangin' on the crossin' dot." With the first plunge into the bed of the stream the water rose to the axles, and then it crept up to the shafts, so that the surgeon could feel it lapping in about his feet, while the dog-cart began to quiver, and it seemed as if it were to be carried away. Sir George was as brave as most men, but he had never forded a Highland river in flood, and the mass of black water racing past behind him, affected his imagination and shook his nerves. He rose from his seat and ordered McClure to turn back, declaring that he would be condemned utterly and eternally if he allowed himself to be drowned for any person. "Sit doon!" thundered McClure. "Condemned ye will be, sooner or later, gin ye shirk your duty, but through the water ye gang the day." Both men spoke much more strongly and shortly, but this is what they intended to say, and it was McClure that prevailed. Jess trailed her feet along the ground with cunning art, and held her shoulder against the stream. McClure leaned forward in his seat, a rein in each hand, and his eyes fixed on Hillock, who was now standing up to the waist in the water, shouting directions and cheering on horse and driver. "Haud tae the richt, doctor, there's a hole yonder. Keep ot for ony's sake. That's it, you're dayin' fine. Steady, man, steady. You're at the deepest, sit heavy in your seats. Up the channel no, and ye'll be oto the swirl. Wheel doon, Jess. Wheel doon, auld mare. Mak straight for me, doctor, and a llgie ye the road ot. Ma word, ye've doon your best, baith o ye, this mornin'," cried Hillock, splashing up to the dog-cart, now in the shallows. "Saul, it was tich and go for a minute in the middle. A Highland ford is a kittle, hazardous, road in the snaw time, but ye re safe no. Good luck to ye up at Westerton, sir. Nane but a rick-hearted man would hae risked the Takti in flood. Ye re bunte succeed after sic a grand beginning." For it had spread already that a famous surgeon had come to do his best for Annie, Tammas Mitchell's wife. 2 hours later McClure came out from Annie's room and laid hold of Tammas, a heap of speechless misery by the kitchen fire, and carried him off to the barn, and spread some corn on the threshing floor, and thrust a flail into his hands. "No we vite begin, and we'll no be doon for an hour, and ye vite lay on without stoppin' till a come for ye, and ll shut the door tae haud in the noise, and keep your dog beside ye, for there mauna be a cheap aboot the house for Annie's sake. Ll day onything ye want me, but if Ll come for ye, Tammas, gin there be danger, but what are ye feared for why the Queen's ain surgeon here?" 50 minutes did the flare rise and fall, save twice, when Tammas crept to the door and listened, the dog lifting his head and whining. It seemed 12 hours instead of 1 when the door swung back, and McClure filled the doorway, preceded by a great burst of light, for the sun had arisen on the snow. His face was as tidings of great joy, and Elspeth told me that there was nothing like it to be seen that afternoon for glory, save the sun itself in the heavens. "I never saw the marrow o' Tammas, and I'll never see the like again. It's a hour, man, wi' who to hitch frae beginning tae end, and she's effein asleep as fine as ye like. Dis he think Annie 'll live? Of course he dis, and be aboot the who's inside a month. That's the good o' bein' a clean-blooded, will livin'. Preserve ye, man, what's wrang why ye? It's a mercy a kept ye, or we would hev head on either job for Sir George. Ye Eric Noel, sit doon on the stray. I'll come back in a while, and ye'll see Annie, just for a minute, but ye mauna say a word." Margaret took him in and let him kneel by Annie's bedside. He said nothing then or afterward, for speech came only once in his lifetime to Tammas, but Annie whispered, "Mine dear man, When the doctor placed the precious bag beside Sir George in our solitary first next morning, he laid a cheque beside it, and was about to leave. "No, no," said the great man. "Mrs. McFadden and I were on the gossip last night, and I know the whole story about you and your friend. You have some right to call me a coward, but I'll never let you count me a mean, miserly rascal." And the cheque with Drumshugh's painful writing fell in 50 pieces on the floor. As the train began to move, a voice from the first called so that all the station heard. "Give us another shake of your hand, McClure. I'm proud to have met you. You are an honor to our profession. Mind the antiseptic dressings." It was market day, but only Jamie Souter and Hillocks had ventured down. "Did ye hear yon, Hillocks? Who day ye feel?" No deny am lifted. Halfway to the junction Hillocks had recovered, and began to grasp the situation. "Tell us what he said. I would like to hae it exact for Drumshoog. They's the identical words, and they're true. There's no a man in Drumtachty disna ken that, except ane." "And wha's that, Jamie?" "It's Wheelum McClure himsel. Man, a thee often gern that he sud fecht awa for us and maybe dee before he kent that he had githered mair love than ony man in the glen. Prud te hae met ye," says Sir George, "and him the greatest doctor in the land. Ye're an honour to your profession." "Hillocks, wadna hae missed it for 20 notes," said James Souter, cynic and ordinary to the parish of Drumtachty. Wandering Willie's Tale, by Sir Walter Scott. "Honest folks like me. How do ye ken whether I am honest, or what I am? I may be the deevil himself for what ye ken, for he has power to come disguised like an angel of light, and besides he is a prime fiddler. He played a sonata to Corelli, ye ken." There was something odd in this speech, and the tone in which it was said. It seemed as if my companion was not always in his constant mind, or that he was willing to try if he could frighten me. I laughed at the extravagance of his language, however, and asked him in reply if he was fool enough to believe that the foul fiend would play so silly a masquerade. "Ye ken little about it, said the old man, shaking his head and beard, and knitting his brows. "I could tell ye something about that." What his wife mentioned of his being a tale-teller as well as a musician now occurred to me, and as, you know, I like tales of superstition, I begged to have a specimen of his talent as we went along. "It is very true," said the blind man, "that when I am tired of scraping thairm or singing bawants I whiles make a tale serve the turn among the country bodies, and I have some fearsome aints, that make the auld carlines shake on the settle, and the bits o' bairns skirl on their minnies out frae their beds. But this that I am going to tell you was a thing that befell in our ain house in my father's time, that is, my father was then a halflands callant, and I tell it to you, that it may be a lesson to you that are but a young thoughtless chap, why ye draw up why on a lonely road, for muckle was the duel and care that came o' to my good sire." He commenced his tale accordingly, in a distinct narrative tone of voice, which he raised and depressed with considerable skill, at times sinking almost into a whisper, and turning his clear but sightless eyeballs upon my face, as if it had been possible for him to witness the impression which his narrative made upon my features. I will not spare a syllable of it, although it be of the longest, so I make a dash, and begin. Ye maun have heard of Sir Robert Redgauntlet of that ilk, who lived in these parts before the dear years. The country will lang mind him, and our fathers used to draw brae thick if ever they heard him named. He was out wy the Highlandmen in Montrose's time, and again he was in the hills wy Glencairn in the 1650 TWA, and SAE when King Charles II came in, wha was in sick favour as the Laird of Redgauntlet. He was knighted at Lonan Court, wy the King's ain sword, and being a red-hot prelatist, he came down here, rampaging like a lion, with commission of lieutenancy, and of lunacy, for what I ken, to put down of the Whigs and Covenanters in the country. Wild work they made of it, for the Whigs were as dour as the Cavaliers were fierce, and it was which should first tire the other. Redgauntlet was I for the strong hand, and his name is kenned as wide in the country as Claverhouse or Tam Dalyell's. Glen, nor dargle, nor mountain, nor cave could hide the puir hillfolk when Redgauntlet was out with bugle and bloodhound after them, as if they had been sae mony deer. And troth, when they fand them, they didna make muckle mair ceremony than a Highlandman wy a roebuck. It was just, "Will ye tak the test? If not, make ready, present, fire!" And there lay the recusant. Far and wide was Sir Robert hated and feared. Men thought he had a direct compact with Satan, that he was proof against steel, and that bullets happed off his buff coat like hailstains from a hearth, that he had a mirror that would turn a hair on the side of Carriffragons, a precipitous side of a mountain in Moffatdale, and muckle to the same purpose, of whilk mair anon. The best blessing they wared on him was, "Deal's scalp why Redgauntlet." He wasna a bad master to his ain folk though, and was weel enough liked by his tenants. And as for the lackeys and troopers that rade out wi' him to the persecutions, as the Whigs ca those killing times, they wad hae drunken themselves blind to his health at ony time. Now you are to ken that my good sire lived on Redgauntlet's grund, they ca the place Primrose No. We had lived on the grund, and under the Redgauntlets, since the riding days, and lang before. It was a pleasant bit, and I think the air is coolerer and fresher there than anywhere else in the country. It's a deserted now, and I sat on the broken door cheek 3 days since, and was glad I couldna see the plight the place was in, but that's a wide o' the mark. There dwelt my good sire, Steenie Steenson, a rambling, rattling chiel he had been in his young days, and could play weel on the pipes. He was famous at hoopers and girders. A Cumberland couldna touch him at jockey Latin, and he had the finest finger for the backlilt between Berwick and Carlisle. The like o' Steenie wasna the sort that they made Whigs o'. And so he became a Tory, as they ca it, which we now ca Jacobites, just out of a kind of necessity, that he might belong to some side or other. He had nae ill will to the Whig bodies, and liked little to see the blood rin, though, being obliged to follow Sir Robert in hunting and hoisting, watching and warding, he saw muckle mischief, and maybe did some that he couldna avoid. Now Steenie was a kind of favourite with his master, and kenned the folk about the castle, and was often sent for to play the pipes when they were at their merriment. Auld Dougal MacCallum, the butler that had followed Sir Robert through good and ill, thick and thin, pool and stream, was specially fond of the pipes, and I gie my good sire his good word why the laird, for Dougal could turn his master round his finger. Weel, round came the Revolution, and it had like to hae broken the hearts baith of Dougal and his master. But the change was not altogether sae great as they feared and other folk thought for. The Whigs made an unco crawing what they wad do with their auld enemies, and in special why Sir Robert Redgauntlet. But there were our mony great folks dipped in the same doings to make a spick and span new world. So Parliament passed it a hour easy, and Sir Robert, bating that he was held to hunting foxes instead of Covenanters, remained just the man he was. His revel was as loud, and his hall as well lighted, as ever it had been, though maybe he lacked the fines of the nonconformists, that used to come to stock his larder and cellar, for it is certain he began to be keener about the rents than his tenants used to find him before, and they behooved to be prompt to the rent day, or else the laird wasna pleased. And he was sick and awesome body that naebody cared to anger him, for the oaths he swore, and the rage that he used to get into, and the looks that he put on made men sometimes think him a devil incarnate. Weel, my good sire was nae manager, no that he was a very great misguider, but he hadna the saving gift, and he got twa terms rent in arrear. He got the first brash at Whitsunday put our wi fair word and piping, but when Martinmas came there was a summons from the grund officer to come wi the rent on a day preceese, or else Steenie behooved to flit. Sair Wark he had to get the siller, but he was weel friended, and at last he got the hale scraped together, 1,000 merks. The maist of it was from a neighbour they ca'd Laurie Leprake, a sly tod. Laurie had wealth o' gear, could hunt wi the hound and rin wi the hare, and be Whig or Tory, sont or sinner, as the wind stood. He was a professor in the Revolution world, but he liked an ara suff of the world, and a tune on the pipes will enough at a by time, and Buna, he thought he had good security for the siller he lend my good sire our the stocking at Primrose No. Away trots my good sire to Redgauntlet Castle wi a heavy purse and a light heart, glad to be out of the laird's danger. Weel, the first thing he learned at the castle was that Sir Robert had fretted himsel into a fit of the gout because he did no appear before 12 o'clock. It wasna altogether for sake of the money, Dougal thought, but because he didna like to part wi my good sire ath the grund. Dougal was glad to see Steenie, and brought him into the great oak parlour, and there sat the laird his leesome lane, excepting that he had beside him a great, ill-favoured jackanape that was a special pet of his. A cankered beast it was, and mony an ill-natured trick it played, ill to please it was, and easily angered, ran about the Hale Castle, chattering and rolling, and pinching and biting folk, specially before ill weather or disturbance in the state. Sir Robert seaed at Major Weir, after the warlock that was burnt, and few folk liked either the name or the conditions of the creature. They thought there was something in it by ordner, and my good sire was not just easy in mind when the door shut on him, and he saw himsel in the room why naebody but the laird, Dougal MacCallum, and the Major, a thing that hadna chanced to him before. Sir Robert sat, or I should say, lay, in a great armchair, why his grand velvet gown, and his feet on a cradle, for he had baith gout and gravel, and his face looked as gash and ghastly as Satan's. Major Weir sat opposite to him, in a red-laced coat, and the laird's wig on his head, and I as Sir Robert gurned why pain, the jackanape gurned too, like a sheep's head between a pair of tangs, an ill-foured, fearsome couple they were. The laird's buff coat was hung on a pin behind him, and his broadsword and his pistols within reach, for he keepit up the auld fashion of having the weapons ready, and a horse saddled day and night, just as he used to do when he was able to loue on horseback, and sway after ony of the hill folk he could get spearings of. Some said it was for fear of the Whigs taking vengeance, but I judge it was just his auld custom. He wasna gine not fear anything. The rental book, why its black cover and brass clasps, was lying beside him, and a book of skullduggery sayings was put betwixt the leaves, to keep it open at the place where it bore evidence against the goodman of Primrose Knowe, as behind the hand with his mails and duties. Sir Robert gave my gudesire a look, as if he would have withered his heart in his bosom. Ye maun ken he had a way of bending his brows that men saw the visible mark of a horseshoe in his forehead, deep dinted, as if it had been stamped there. "Are ye come light-handed, ye son of a tomb whistle?" said Sir Robert. "Zounds! If you are." My gudesire, with as good a countenance as he could put on, made a leg, and placed the bag of money on the table why a dash, like a man that does something clever. The laird drew it to him hastily. "Is all here, Steenie, man? Your honour will find it right," said my gudesire. "Here, Dougal," said the laird. "Gie Steenie a tass of brandy, till I count the siller and write the receipt." But they werena weel out of the room when Sir Robert gied a yellock that guard the castle rock. Back ran Dougal, in flew the liveryman, yell on yell gied the laird, ilkane mair awfu' than the ither. My gudesire knew not whether to stand or flee, but he ventured back into the parlour, where was gone hurdy-gurdy, naebody to say, "Come in," or "Gie out." Terribly the laird roared for cold water to his feet, and wine to cool his throat, and hell, and its flames was aye the word in his mouth. They brought him water, and when they plunged his swollen feet into the tub, he cried out it was burning, and folks say that it did bubble and sparkle like a seething cauldron. He flung the cup at Dougal's head and said he had given him blood instead of burgundy, and sure enough, the lass washed clotted blood aff the carpet the neist day. The jackanape they seaed Major Weir, it gibbered and cried as if it was mocking its master. My gudesire's head was like to turn. He forgot baith siller and receipt, and downstairs he banged. But, as he ran, the shrieks came fainter and fainter. There was a deep-drawn shivering groan, and word gied through the castle that the laird was dead. Weel, away came my gudesire wi' his finger in his mouth, and his best hope was that Dougal had seen the money bag and heard the laird speak of writing the receipt. The young laird, now Sir John, came from Edinburgh to see things put to rights. Sir John and his father never greed weel. Sir John had been bred an advocate, and afterwards sat in the last Scots Parliament, and voted for the Union, having gotten, it was thought, a rug of the compensations. If his father could have come out of his grave he would have brained him for it on his own hearthstane. Some thought it was easier counting with the auld rough knight than the fair-spoken young ane, but mair of that anon. Dougal MacCallum, poor body, either grat nor grained, but gied about the house looking like a corpse, but directing, as was his duty, the order of the grand funeral. Now Dougal looked I war and war when night was coming, and was I the last to gang to his bed, Wilk was in a little round just opposite the chamber of dais, Wilk his master occupied while he was living, and where he now lay in state, as they canned it, Wheeladay. The night before the funeral Dougal could keep his own counsel nae longer. He came down wi' his proud spirit, and fairly asked auld Hutcheon to sit in his room with him for an hour. When they were in the round, Dougal took a tass of brandy to himsel, and gave another to Hutcheon, and wished him all health and lang life, and said that, for himsel, he wasna lang for this world, for that every night, since Sir Robert's death, his silver call had sounded from the state chamber just as it used to do at nights in his lifetime to call Dougal to help to turn him in his bed. Dougal said that being alone with the dead on that floor of the tower, for naebody cared to wake Sir Robert Redgauntlet like another corpse, he had never dared to answer the call, but that now his conscience checked him for neglecting his duty, for, though death break service, said MacCallum, it shall never weak my service to Sir Robert, and I will answer his next whistle, so be you will stand by me, Hutcheon. Hutcheon had nae will to the work, but he had stood by Dougal in battle and broil, and he wad not fail him at this pinch. So down the carles sat ower a stoup of brandy, and Hutcheon, who was something of a clerk, would have read a chapter of the Bible, but Dougal would hear naething but a blot of Davy Lindsay. Wilk was the war preparation. When midnight came, and the house was quiet as the grave, sure enough the silver whistle sounded as sharp and shrill as if Sir Robert was blowing it, and up got the TWA auld serving men, and tottered into the room where the dead man lay. Hutcheon saw enough at the first glance, for there were torches in the room, which showed him the foul fiend, in his ain shape, sitting on the laird's coffin. Hour he cooped as if he had been dead. He could not tell how lang he lay in a trance at the door, but when he gathered himsel he cried on his neighbour, and getting nae answer raised the house, when Dougal was found lying dead within TWA steps of the bed where his master's coffin was placed. As for the whistle, it was gane aince and I, but mony a time was it heard at the top of the house on the bartizan, and amang the auld chimneys and turrets where the howlets have their nests. Sir John hushed the matter up, and the funeral passed over without mair bogey wark. But when it was hour, and the laird was beginning to settle his affairs, every tenant was called up for his arrears, and my gudesire for the full sum that stood against him in the rental book. Weel, away he trots to the castle to tell his story, and there he is introduced to Sir John, sitting in his father's chair, in deep mourning, with weepers and hanging cravat, and a small walking rapier by his side, instead of the auld broadsword that had a hundredweight of steel about it, what with blade, chape, and basket hilt. I have heard their communings so often told ower that I almost think I was their missile, though I couldna be born at the time. In fact, Allan, my companion, mimicked, with a good deal of humour, the flattering, conciliating tone of the tenant's address and the hypocritical melancholy of the laird's reply. His grandfather, he said, had while he spoke, his eye fixed on the rental book, as if it were a mastiff dog that he was afraid would spring up and bite him. I wish ye joy, sir, of the head seat and the white loaf and the brid lairdship. Your father was a kind man to friends and followers. Muckle grace to you, Sir John, to fill his shoon, his boots I sold say, for he seldom wore shoon, unless it were mules when he had the gout. Aye, Steenie, quoth the laird, sighing deeply, and putting his napkin to his een. His was a sudden call, and he will be missed in the country, no time to set his house in order, well prepared Godward, no doubt, which is the root of the matter, but left us behind a tangled hasp to wind, Steenie. Hem! Hem! We maun go to business, Steenie, much to do, and little time to do it in. Here he opened the fatal volume. I have heard of a thing they call Doomsday Book. I am clear it has been a rental of back-ganging tenants. Stephen, said Sir John, still in the same soft, sleek-it tone of voice. Stephen Stevenson, or Stevenson, ye are down here for a year's rent behind the hand, due at last term. Stephen. Please your honour, Sir John, I paid it to your father. Sir John. Ye took a receipt, then, doubtless, Stephen, and can produce it? Stephen. Indeed, I hadna time, and it like your honour, for nae sooner had I set down the siller, and just as his honour, Sir Robert, that's gain, drew it ill him to count it and write out the receipt, he was ta'en wi' the pains that removed him. That was unlucky, said Sir John, after a pause. but ye may be paid it in the presence of somebody. I want but a talus qualis evidence, Stephen. I would go hours strictly to work with no poor man. Stephen. Troth, Sir John, there was naebody in the room but Dougal MacCallum, the butler. But, as your honour kens, he has e'en followed his auld master. Very unlucky again, Stephen, said Sir John, without altering his voice a single note. The man to whom ye paid the money is dead, and the man who witnessed the payment is dead too, and the siller, which should have been to the fore, is neither seen nor heard tell of in the repositories. How am I to believe of this? Stephen. I dinna ken, your honour, but there is a bit memorandum note of the very coins, for, God help me, I had to borrow out of 20 purses, and I am sure that ilka man there set down will take his grit oath for what purpose I borrowed the money. Sir John. I have little doubt ye borrowed the money, Steenie. It is the payment that I want to have proof of. Stephen. The siller maun be about the house, Sir John. And since your honour never got it, and his honour that was canna have ta'en it wy him, maybe some of the family may hae seen it. Sir John. We will examine the servants, Stephen, that is but reasonable. But lackey and lass, and page and groom, all denied stoutly that they had ever seen such a bag of money as my gudesire described. What saw war, he had unluckily not mentioned to any living soul of them his purpose of paying his rent. Queen had noticed something under his arm, but she took it for the pipes. Sir John Redgauntlet ordered the servants out of the room and then said to my gudesire, Now, Steenie, ye see ye have fair play, and as I have little doubt ye can better where to find the siller than ony other body, I beg in fair terms, and for your own sake, that you will end this fasherie, for, Stephen, ye maun pay or flit. The Lord forge ye your opinion, said Stephen, driven almost to his wits' end. I am an honest man. So am I, Stephen, said his honour, and so are all the folks in the house, I hope. But if there be a knave among us, it must be he that tells the story he cannot prove. He paused, and then added mair sternly, If I understand your trick, sir, you want to take advantage of some malicious reports concerning things in this family, and particularly respecting my father's sudden death, thereby to cheat me out of the money, and perhaps take away my character by insinuating that I have received the rent I am demanding. Where do you suppose the money to be? I insist upon knowing. My gudesire saw everything look so muckle against him that he grew nearly desperate. However, he shifted from one foot to another, looked to every corner of the room, and made no answer. Speak out, sirrah, said the laird, assuming a look of his father's, a very particular ain, which he had when he was angry. It seemed as if the wrinkles of his frown made that self-same fearful shape of a horse's shoe in the middle of his brow. Speak out, sir! I will know your thoughts. Do you suppose that I have this money? Far be it frae me to say so, said Stephen. Do you charge any of my people with having taken it? I wad be laith to charge them that may be innocent, said my gudesire. And if there be any one that is guilty, I have nae proof. Somewhere the money must be, if there is a word of truth in your story, said Sir John. I ask where you think it is, and demand a correct answer. In hell, if you will have my thoughts of it, said my gudesire, driven to extremity. In hell! With your father, his jackanape, and his silver whistle. Down the stairs he ran, for the parlour was nae place for him after such a word, and he heard the laird swearing blood and wounds behind him, as fast as ever did Sir Robert, and roaring for the baillie and the baron officer. Away rode my gudesire to his chief creditor, him they caa'd Laurie Leprake, to try if he could make a nithing out of him. But when he told his story, he got the worst word in his wame. Thief, beggar, and diver were the softest terms, and to the boot of these hard terms, Laurie brought up the auld story of dipping his hand in the blood of God's saints, just as if a tenant could have helped riding with the laird. And that a laird like Sir Robert Redgauntlet. My gudesire was, by this time, far beyond the bounds of patience, and while he and Laurie were at deal speed the liars, he was wanchancy enough to abuse Leprake's doctrine as weel as the man, and said things that garred folks' flesh grew that heard them. He wasna just himsel', and he had lived why a wild said in his day. At last they parted, and my gudesire was to ride hame through the wood of Pimmerkey, that is a foe of black firs, as they say. I ken the wood, but the furs may be black or white for what I can tell. At the entry of the wood there is a wild common, and on the edge of the common a little lonely change house, that was keepit then by an hostler wife. They sold hay caed her to be fall, and their puir Steenie cried for a muchkin of brandy, for he had had no refreshment the hale day. Tibby was earnest why him to take a bite of meat, but he couldna think o' tea, nor would he take his foot out of the stirrup, and took off the brandy, wholly at TWA draughts, and named a toast at each. The first was, the memory of Sir Robert Redgauntlet, and may he never lie quiet in his grave till he had righted his poor bond tenant, and the second was, a health to man's enemy, if he would but get him back the pock of siller, or tell him what came o' tea, for he saw the hale world was like to regard him as a thief and a cheat, and he took that war than even the ruin of his house and hald. On he rode, little caring where. It was a dark night turned, and the trees made it yet darker, and he let the beast take its ain road through the wood, when all of a sudden, from tired and weary that it was before, the nag began to spring and flee and stend, that my good sire could hardly keep the saddle. Upon the whilk, a horseman, suddenly riding up beside him, said, "That's a metal beast of yours, friend, will you sell him?" So saying, he touched the horse's neck with his riding wand, and it fell into its auld hio of a stumbling trot. "But his spunk's soon out of him, I think," continued the stranger. "And that is like mony a man's courage, that thinks he wad do great things." My gudesire scarce listened to this, but spurred his horse, with, "Good end to you, friend." But it's like the stranger was ane that doesna lightly yield his point, for, ride as Steenie liked, he was aye beside him at the selfsame pace. At last my gudesire, Steenie Steenson, grew half angry, and, to say the truth, half feared. "What is it that you want with me, friend?" he said. "If ye be a robber, I have nae money; if ye be a leal man wanting company, I have nae heart to mirth or speaking; and if ye want to ken the road, I scarce ken it missile." "If you will tell me your grief," said the stranger, "I am one that, though I have been sair misket in the world, am the only hand for helping my friends." So my gudesire, to ease his ain heart, mair than from any hope of help, told him the story from beginning to end. "It's a hard pinch," said the stranger, "but I think I can help you. If you could lend me the money, sir, and take a lang day, I ken nae other help on earth," said my gudesire. "But there may be some under the earth," said the stranger. "Come, I'll be frank wi' you. I could lend you the money on bond, but you would maybe scruple my terms. Now I can tell you that your auld laird is disturbed in his grave by your curses and the wailing of your family, and if ye dore venture to go to see him, he will give you the receipt." My gudesire's hair stood on end at this proposal, but he thought his companion might be some humorsome chield that was trying to frighten him, and might end with lending him the money. Besides, he was bald wide brandy, and desperate wide distress, and he said he had courage to go to the gate of hell, and a step farther, for that receipt. The stranger laughed. Weel, they rode on through the thickest of the wood, when, all of a sudden, the horse stopped at the door of a great house, and, but that he knew the place was 10 miles off, my father would have thought he was at Redgauntlet Castle. They rode into the outer courtyard, through the muckle falding yetts, and aneath the auld portcullis, and the whole front of the house was lighted, and there were pipes and fiddles, and as much dancing and durray within as used to be at Sir Robert's house at Pace and Yule, and such high seasons. They lap off, and my gudesire, as seemed to him, fastened his horse to the very ring he had tied him to that morning when he gied to wait on the young Sir John. "God!" said my gudesire, "if Sir Robert's death be but a dream!" He knocked at the hod door just as he was wont, and his auld acquaintance, Dougal MacCallum, just after his wont, too, came to open the door, and said, "Piper Steenie, are you there, lad? Sir Robert has been crying for you." My gudesire was like a man in a dream. He looked for the stranger, but he was gane for the time. At last he just tried to say, "Ha! Dougal Drivauer, are you living? I thought ye had been dead." "Never fash yoursel wi' me," said Dougal, "but look to yoursel, and see ye tak naething frae onybody here, either meat, drink, or siller, except the receipt that is your ain." So saying, he led the way out through the halls and trances that were weel kenned to my gudesire, and into the auld oak parlour, and there was as much singing of profane sayings, and burling of red wine, and blasphemy and skullduggery, as had ever been in Redgauntlet Castle when it was at the blithest. But Lord take us in keeping! What a set of ghastly revellers there were that sat around that table! My gudesire ken mony that had long before gained to their place, for often had he piped to the most part in the hall of Redgauntlet. There was the fierce Middleton, and the dissolute Roths, and the crafty Lauderdale, and Dalziel, with his bald head and a beard to his girdle, and Earl Shall, with Cameron's blood on his hand, and Wild Bonshaw, that tied blessed Mr. Cargill's limbs till the blood sprung, and Dumbarton Douglas, the twice-turned traitor baith to country and king. There was the bloody advocate Mackinaw, who for his worldly wit and wisdom had been to the rest as a god. And there was Claverhouse, as beautiful as when he lived, with his long, dark, curled locks streaming down over his laced buff coat, and with his left hand always on his right spule blade, to hide the wound that the silver bullet had made. He sat apart from them all, and looked at them with a melancholy, haughty countenance, while the rest hallooed and sang and laughed that the room rang. But their smiles were fearfully contorted from time to time, and their laughter passed into such wild sounds as made my gudesire's very nails grow blue, and chilled the marrow in his banes. They that waited at the table were just the wicked serving men and troopers that had done their work and cruel bidding on earth. There was the lang lad of the Nethertown, that helped to take Argyle, and the bishop's summoner, that they called the Deal's rattlebag, and the wicked guardsmen in their lace coats, and the savage Highland Amorites, that shed blood like water, and mony a proud serving man, haughty of heart and bloody of hand, cringing to the rich, and making them wickeder than they would be, grinding the poor to powder when the rich had broken them to fragments. And mony mere were coming and ganging, as busy in their vocation as if they had been alive. Sir Robert Redgauntlet, in the midst of this fearful riot, cried, why a voice like thunder, on Steenie Piper to come to the board head where he was sitting, his legs stretched out before him, and swathed up with flannel, with his holster pistols aside him, while the great broadsword rested against his chair, just as my gudesire had seen him the last time upon earth. The very cushion for the jackanape was close to him. But the creature itself was not there, it wasna its hour, it's likely, for he heard them say, as he came forward, is not the Major come yet? And another answered, the jackanape will be here betimes the morn. And when my gudesire came forward, Sir Robert or his gayest, or the devil in his likeness, said, Weel, Piper, hae ye settled why my son for the year's rent? With much ado my father gat breath to say that Sir John would not settle without his honour's receipt. Ye shall hae that for a tune of the pipes, Steenie, said the appearance of Sir Robert. Play us up, We'll Hoddled Lucky. Now this was a tune my gudesire learned frae a warlock, that heard it when they were worshipping Satan at their meetings, and my gudesire had sometimes played it at the renting suppers in Redgauntlet Castle, but never very willingly, and now he grew called at the very name of it, and said for excuse, he hadna his pipes wy him. Macallum, ye limb of Beelzebub, said the fearful Sir Robert, bring Steenie the pipes that I am keeping for him. Macallum brought a pair of pipes might have served the piper of Donald of the Isles, but he gave my gudesire a nudge as he offered them, and looking secretly and closely, Steenie saw that the chanter was of steel, and heated to a white heat, so he had fair warning not to trust his fingers with it. So he excused himself again, and said he was faint and frightened, and had not wind enough to fill the bag. Then ye maun eat and drink, Steenie, said the figure, for we do little else here, and it's ill speaking between a foeman and a fasting. Now these were the very words that the bloody Earl of Douglas said to keep the king's messenger in hand while he cut the head off MacLellan of Bombay, at the Threve Castle, and put Steenie mair and mair on his guard. So he spoke up like a man, and said he came neither to eat nor drink, nor make minstrelsy, but simply for his ain, to ken what was come o' the money he had paid, and to get a discharge for it. And he was so stout-hearted by this time that he charged Sir Robert for conscience's sake, he had no power to say the holy name, and as he hoped for peace and rest, to spread no snares for him, but just to give him his ain. The appearance gnashed its teeth and laughed, but it took from a large pocket-book the receipt, and handed it to Steenie. There is your receipt, ye pitiful cur, and for the money, my dog whelp of a son may go look for it in the cat's cradle. My gudesire uttered mony thanks, and was about to retire, when Sir Robert roared aloud. Stop, thou sack-doubling son of a! I am not done with thee. Here we do nothing for nothing, and you must return on this very day 12month to pay your master the homage that you owe me for my protection. My father's tongue was loosed of a suddenty, and he said aloud, I refer myself to God's pleasure, and not to yours. He had no sooner uttered the word than all was dark around him, and he sank on the earth with such a sudden shock that he lost both breath and sense. How lang Steenie lay there he could not tell, but when he came to himself he was lying in the auld kirkyard of Redgauntlet Perricine, just at the door of the family aisle, and the scutcheon of the auld knight, Sir Robert, hanging over his head. There was a deep morning fog on grass and gravestane around him, and his horse was feeding quietly beside the minister's TWA cows. Steenie would have thought the whole was a dream, but he had the receipt in his hand fairly written and signed by the auld laird. Only the last letters of his name were a little disorderly, written like one seized with sudden pain. Sorely troubled in his mind, he left that dreary place, rode through the mist to Redgauntlet Castle, and with much ado he got speech of the laird. Well, you diver bankrupt, was the first word. Have you brought me my rent? No, answered my gudesire. I have not, but I have brought your honour Sir Robert's receipt for it. How, sirrah? Sir Robert's receipt? You told me he had not given you one. Will your honour please to see if that bit line is right? Sir John looked at every line, and at every letter, with much attention, and at last at the date, which my gudesire had not observed. From my appointed place, he read, this 25th of November. What? That is yesterday. Villain, thou must have gone to hell for this. I got it from your honour's father, whether he be in heaven or hell I know not, said Steenie. I will debate you for a warlock to the Privy Council, said Sir John. I will send you to your master, the devil, with the help of a tar barrel and a torch. I intend to debate missile to the presbytery, said Steenie, and tell them all I have seen last night. Woke are things fitter for them to judge of than a boral man like me. Sir John paused, composed himself, and desired to hear the full history, and my gudesire told it him from point to point, as I have told it you, either more nor less. Sir John was silent again for a long time, and at last he said, very composedly, Steenie, this story of yours concerns the honour of many a noble family besides mine, and if it be a leasing making, to keep yourself out of my danger, the least you can expect is to have a red-hot iron driven through your tongue, and that will be as bad as scalding your fingers by a red-hot chanter. But yet it may be true, Steenie, and if the money cast up, I shall not know what to think of it. But where shall we find the cat's cradle? There are cats enough about the old house, but I think they kitten without the ceremony of bed or cradle. We would best ask Hutcheon, said my gudesire. He kens of the odd corners about as weel as another serving man that is now gane, and that I wad not like to name. Aweel, Hutcheon, when he was asked, told them that a ruinous turret lang disused, next to the clockhouse, only accessible by a ladder, for the opening was on the outside, above the battlements, was called of old the Cat's Cradle. There will I go immediately, said Sir John, and he took, with what purpose heaven kens, one of his father's pistols from the hall table, where they had lain since the night he died, and hastened to the battlements. It was a dangerous place to climb, for the ladder was auld and frail, and wanted ane or twa rounds. However, up got Sir John, and entered at the turret door, where his body stopped the only little light that was in the bit turret. Something flees at him why a vengeance, may stang him back hour, bang! Gied the knight's pistol, and Hutcheon, that held the ladder, and my gudesire, that stood beside him, hears a loud skelloch. A minute after, Sir John flings the body of the jackanape down to them, and cries that the siller is fund, and that they should come up and help him. And there was the bag of siller sure enough, and mony other thing besides, that had been missing for mony a day. And Sir John, when he had rived the turret wheel, led my gudesire into the dining parlour, and took him by the hand, and spoke kindly to him, and said he was sorry he should have doubted his word, and that he would hereafter be a good master to him, to make amends. And now, Steenie, said Sir John, Although this vision of yours tends, on the whole, to my father's credit as an honest man, that he should, even after his death, desire to see justice done to a poor man like you, yet you are sensible that ill-dispositioned men might make bad constructions upon it concerning his soul's health. So I think we had better lay the hail dirtim on that ill-deedy creature, Major Weir, and say naething about your dream in the wood of Pimmerkey. You had ta'en our muckle brandy to be very certain about anything, and Steenie this receipt. His hand shook while he held it out. It's but a queer kind of document, and we will do best, I think, to put it quietly in the fire. Odie, but for as queer as it is, it's a the voucher I have for my rent, said my gudesire, who was afraid, it may be, of losing the benefit of Sir Robert's discharge. I will bear the contents to your credit in the rental book, and give you a discharge under my own hand, said Sir John, and that on the spot. And Steenie, if you can hold your tongue about this matter, you shall sit, from this time downward, at an easier rent. Mony thanks to your honor, said Steenie, who saw easily in what corner the wind was. Doubtless I will be conformable to all your honor's commands. Only I would willingly speak why some powerful minister on the subject, for I do not like the sort of summons of appointment woke your honor's father. Do not call the phantom my father, said Sir John, interrupting him. Well then, the thing that was so like him, said my gudesire. He spoke of my coming back to see him this time 12-month, and it's a weight on my conscience. Aweel then, said Sir John, if you be so much distressed in mind, you may speak to our minister of the parish. He is a douce man, regards the honor of our family, and the mayor that he may look for some patronage from me. Why that, my father readily agreed that the receipt should be burnt, and the laird threw it into the chimney with his iron hand. Burn it would not for them, though, but away it flew up the lum, while a lang train of sparks at its tail, and a hissing noise like a squib. My gudesire gied down to the manse, and the minister, when he had heard the story, said it was his real opinion that, though my gudesire had gained very far in tampering with dangerous matters, yet as he had refused the devil's alls, for such was the offer of meat and drink, and had refused to do homage by piping at his bidding, he hoped that, if he held a circumspect walk hereafter, Satan could take little advantage by what was come and gain. And indeed, my gudesire, of his ain accord, lang forswore baith the pipes and the brandy. It was not even till the year was out, and the fatal day passed, that he would so much as take the fiddle or drink usquebaugh or tippenny. Sir John made up his story about the jackanape as he liked himself, and some believe till this day there was no more in the matter than the filching nature of the brute. Indeed, ye allow no hinder some to thread that it was none o' the auld enemy that Dougal and Hutcheon saw in the laird's room, but only that one chancy creature the Major, capering on the coffin, and that, as to the blawing on the laird's whistle that was heard after he was dead, the filthy brute could do that as weel as the laird himsel, if no better. But heaven kens the truth, whilk first came out by the minister's wife, after Sir John and her ain goodman were baith in the moulds. And then my gudesire, wha was failed in his limbs, but not in his judgment or memory, at least nothing to speak of, was obliged to tell the real narrative to his friends, for the credit of his good name. He might else have been charged for a warlock. The shades of evening were growing thicker around us as my conductor finished his long narrative with this moral. You see, Berkey, it is nae chancy thing to tak a stranger traveller for a guide when you are in an uncouth land. I should not have made that inference, said I. Your grandfather's adventure was fortunate for himself, whom it saves from ruin and distress, and fortunate for his landlord. Aye, but they had baith to sup the sauce o' tea sooner or later, said Wandering Willie. What was frist wasna forgiven. Sir John died before he was much over 60, and it was just like a moment's illness. And for my gudesire, though he departed in fullness of life, yet there was my father, a yald man of 45, fell down betwixt the stilts of his plough, and raised never again, and left nae bairn but me, a puir, sightless, fatherless, motherless creature, could neither work nor want. Things gied weel enough at first, for Sir Regwald Redgauntlet, the only son of Sir John, and the oi of auld Sir Robert, and ways me, the last of the honourable house, took the farm aff our hands, and brought me into his household to have care of me. My head never settled since I lost him, And if I say another word about it, deal a bar will I have the heart to play the knight. Look out, my gentle chap, he resumed in a different tone. Ye should see the lights at Brokenburn Glen by this time. The Glenmutchkin Railway, by Professor A. Town. The following tale appeared in Blackwood's Magazine for October, 1845. It was intended by the writer as a sketch of some of the more striking features of the railway mania, then in full progress throughout Great Britain, as exhibited in Glasgow and Edinburgh. Although bearing the appearance of a burlesque, it was in truth an accurate delineation, as will be acknowledged by many a gentleman who had the misfortune to be out in the 45, and subsequent disclosures have shown that it was in no way exaggerated. Although the Glenmutchkin line was purely imaginary, and was not intended by the writer to apply to any particular scheme then before the public, it was identified in Scotland with more than one reckless and impracticable project, and even the characters introduced were supposed to be typical of personages who had attained some notoriety in the throng of speculation. Any such resemblances must be considered as fortuitous, for the writer cannot charge himself with the discourtesy of individual satire or allusion. I was confoundedly hard up. My patrimony, never of the largest, had been for the last year on the decrease. A herald would have emblazoned it. Argent, a money bag improper, in detriment. And though the attenuating process was not excessively rapid, it was, nevertheless, proceeding at a steady ratio. As for the ordinary means and appliances by which men contrived to recruit their exhausted exchequers, I knew none of them. Work I abhorred with a detestation worthy of a scion of nobility, and I believe you could just as soon have persuaded the lineal representative of the Howards or Percys to exhibit himself in the character of a mountebank, as have got me to trust my person on the pinnacle of a three-legged stool. The rule of three is all very well for base mechanical souls, but I flatter myself I have an intellect too large to be limited to a ledger. Augustus, said my poor mother to me, while stroking my hyacinthine tresses, one fine morning, in the very dawn and budding time of my existence. Augustus, my dear boy, whatever you do, never forget that you are a gentleman. The maternal maxim sank deeply into my heart, and I never for a moment have forgotten it. Notwithstanding this aristocratic resolution, the great practical question, how am I to live? Began to thrust itself unpleasantly before me. I am one of that unfortunate class who have neither uncles nor aunts. For me, no yellow liverless individual, with characteristic bamboo and pigtail, emblems of 500,000, returned to his native shores from Ceylon or remote Penang. For me, no venerable spinster hoarded in the Trongate, permitting herself few luxuries during a long protracted life, save a lass and a lantern, a parrot, and the invariable bawdrons of antiquity. No such luck was mine. Had all Glasgow perished by some vast epidemic, I should not have found myself one farthing the richer. There would have been no golden balsam for me in the accumulated woes of Tradestown, Shettleston, and Camlitchie. The time has been when, according to Washington Irving and other veracious historians, a young man had no sooner got into difficulties than a guardian angel appeared to him in a dream, with the information that at such and such a bridge, or under such and such a tree, he might find, at a slight expenditure of labor, a gallipot secured with bladder, and filled with glittering tomans, or, in the extremity of despair, the youth had only to append himself to a cord, and straightway the other end thereof, forsaking its staple in the roof, would disclose amid the fractured ceiling the glories of a profitable pose. These blessed days have long since gone by. At any rate, no such luck was mine. My guardian angel was either woefully ignorant of metallurgy, or the stores had been surreptitiously ransacked, and as to the other expedient, I frankly confess I should have liked some better security for its result than the precedent of the heir of Lynn. It is a great consolation, amid all the evils of life, to know that, however bad your circumstances may be, there is always somebody else in nearly the same predicament. My chosen friend and ally Bob M. Corkindale was equally hard up with myself, and if possible, more averse to exertion. Bob was essentially a speculative man, that is, in a philosophical sense. He had once got hold of a stray volume of Adam Smith, and muddled his brains for a whole week over the intricacies of the Wealth of Nations. The result was a crude farrago of notions regarding the true nature of money, the soundness of currency, and relative value of capital, with which he nightly favored an admiring audience at the Crow, for Bob was by no means, in the literal acceptation of the word, a dry philosopher. On the contrary, he perfectly appreciated the merits of each distinct distillery, and was understood to be the compiler of a statistical work entitled A Tour Through the Alcoholic Districts of Scotland. It had very early occurred to me, who knew as much of political economy as of the bagpipes, that a gentleman so well versed in the art of accumulating national wealth must have some remote ideas of applying his principles profitably on a smaller scale. Accordingly, I gave M. Corkindale an unlimited invitation to my lodgings, and like a good hearty fellow as he was, he availed himself every evening of the license, for I had laid in a 14-gallon cask of Oban whiskey, and the quality of the malt was undeniable. These were the first glorious days of general speculation. Railroads were emerging from the hands of the greater into the fingers of the lesser capitalists. 2 successful harvests had given a fearful stimulus to the national energy, and it appeared perfectly certain that all the populous towns would be united, and the rich agricultural districts intersected, by the magical bands of iron. The columns of the newspapers teemed every week with the parturition of novel schemes, and the shares were no sooner announced than they were rapidly subscribed for. But what is the use of my saying anything more about the history of last year? Every one of us remembers it perfectly well. It was a capital year on the whole, and put money into many a pocket. About that time, Bob and I commenced operations. Our available capital, or negotiable bullion, in the language of my friend, amounted to about £300, which we set aside as a joint fund for speculation. Bob, in a series of learned discourses, had convinced me that it was not only folly, but a positive sin, to leave this sum lying in the bank at a pitiful rate of interest, and otherwise unemployed, while every one else in the kingdom was having a pluck at the public pigeon. Somehow or other, we were unlucky in our first attempts. Speculators are like wasps, for when they have once got hold of a ripening and peach-like project, they keep it rigidly for their own swarm, and repel the approach of interlopers. Notwithstanding all our efforts, and very ingenious ones they were, we never, in a single instance, succeeded in procuring an allocation of original shares, and though we did now and then make a bit by purchase, we more frequently bought at a premium, and parted with our scrip at a discount. At the end of 6 months we were not £20 richer than before. "This will never do," said Bob, as he sat one evening in my rooms compounding his second tumbler. "I thought we were living in an enlightened age, but I find I was mistaken. That brutal spirit of monopoly is still abroad and uncurbed. The principles of free trade are utterly forgotten, or misunderstood. Else how comes it that David Spool received but yesterday an allocation of 200 shares in the Western Midland Junction, while your application and mine, for 1,000 each, were overlooked? Is this a state of things to be tolerated? Why should he, with his £50,000, receive a slapping premium, while our 300 of available capital remains unrepresented? The fact is monstrous, and demands the immediate and serious interference of the legislature. It is a burning shame," said I, fully alive to the manifold advantages of a premium. "I'll tell you what, Dunshunner," rejoined M. Corkindale, "it's no use going on in this way. We haven't shown half pluck enough. These fellows consider us as snobs because we don't take the bull by the horns. Now's the time for a bold stroke. The public are quite ready to subscribe for anything, and we'll start a railway for ourselves." "Start a railway with £300 of capital? Pshaw, man! You don't know what you're talking about. We've a great deal more capital than that. Have not I told you 70 times over that everything a man has, his coat, his hat, the tumblers he drinks from, nay, his very corporeal existence, is absolute marketable capital? What do you call that 14-gallon cask, I should like to know? A compound of hoops and staves, containing about 1.5 quarts of spirits. You have effectually accounted for the rest. Then it has gone to the fund of profit and loss, that's all. Never let me hear you sport those old theories again. Capital is indestructible, as I am ready to prove to you any day, in half an hour. But let us sit down seriously to business. We are rich enough to pay for the advertisements, and that is all we need care for in the meantime. The public is sure to step in and bear us out handsomely with the rest. But where in the face of the habitable globe shall the railway be? England is out of the question, and I hardly know a spot in the lowlands that is not occupied already. What do you say to a Spanish scheme, the Alcantara Union? Hang me if I know whether Alcantara is in Spain or Portugal, but nobody else does, and the one is quite as good as the other. Or what would you think of the Palermo Railway, with a branch to the sulphur mines? That would be popular in the north, or the Pyrenees direct. They would all go to a premium. I must confess I should prefer a line at home. Well then, why not try the Highlands? There must be lots of traffic there in the shape of sheep, grouse, and cockney tourists, not to mention salmon and other etceteras. Couldn't we tip them a railway somewhere in the west? There's Glenmuchkin, for instance. Capital, my dear fellow! Glorious! By Jove, first rate! Shouted Bob, in an ecstasy of delight. There's a distillery there, you know, and a fishing village at the foot, at least there used to be 6 years ago, when I was living with the exciseman. There may be some bother about the population, though. The last laird shipped every mother's son of the aboriginal Celts to America. But, after all, that's not of much consequence. I see the whole thing. Unrivaled scenery, stupendous waterfalls, herds of black cattle, spot where Prince Charles Edward met MacGregor of Glengargar and his clan. We could not possibly have lighted on a more promising place. Hand us over that sheet of paper, like a good fellow, and a pen. There is no time to be lost, and the sooner we get out the prospectus the better. But heaven bless you, Bob, there's a great deal to be thought of first. Who are we to get for a provisional committee? That's very true, said Bob musingly. We must treat them to some respectable names, that is, good-sounding ones. I'm afraid there is little chance of our producing a peer to begin with. None whatever, unless we could invent one, and that's hardly safe. Burke's peerage has gone through too many editions. Couldn't we try the Dormants? That would be rather dangerous in the teeth of the standing orders. But what do you say to a baronet? There's Sir Pollux Tremens. He got himself served the other day to a Nova Scotia baronetcy, with just as much title as you or I have, and he has sported the riband, and dined out on the strength of it ever since. He'll join us at once, for he has not a sixpence to lose. Down with him, then, and we headed the provisional list with the pseudo-orange tawny. No, said Bob, it's quite indispensable, as this is a Highland line, that we should put forward a chief or two. That has always a great effect upon the English, whose feudal notions are rather of the mistiest, and principally derived from Waverley. Why not write yourself down as the Laird of Corkindale? Said I. I dare say you would not be negatived by a counterclaim. That would hardly do, replied Bob, as I intend to be secretary. After all, what's the use of thinking about it? Here goes for an extempore chief. And the villain wrote down the name of Tavish M. Tavish of Invertivish. I say, though, said I, we must have a real Highlander on the list. If we go on this way, it will become a justiciary matter. You're devilish scrupulous, Gus, said Bob, who, if left to himself, would have stuck in the names of the heathen gods and goddesses, or borrowed his directors from the Ossianic chronicles, rather than have delayed the prospectus. Where the mischief are we to find the men? I can think of no others likely to go the whole hog, can you? I don't know a single Celt in Glasgow except old M. Closkey, the drunken porter at the corner of Jamaica Street. He's the very man. I suppose, after the manner of his tribe, he will do anything for a pint of whiskey. But what shall we call him? Jamaica Street, I fear, will hardly do for a designation. Call him the M. Closkey. It will be sonorous in the ears of the Saxon. Bravo! And another chief was added to the roll of the clans. No, said Bob, we must put you down. Recollect, all the management, that is, the allocation, will be entrusted to you. Augustus, you haven't a middle name, I think? Well then, suppose we interpolate Reginald, it has a smack of the Crusades. Augustus Reginald Dunshunner, Esq of, where, in the name of Munchausen? I'm sure I don't know. I never had any land beyond the contents of a flower pot. Stay, I rather think I have a superiority somewhere about Paisley. Just the thing, cried Bob. It's heritable property, and therefore titular. What's the denomination? St. Mirren's. Beautiful. Dunshunner of St. Mirren's, I give you joy. Had you discovered that a little sooner, and I wonder you did not think of it, we might both of us have had lots of allocations. These are not the times to conceal hereditary distinctions. But now comes the serious work. We must have 1 or 2 men of known wealth upon the list. The chaff is nothing without a decoy bird. Now, can't you help me with a name? In that case, said I, the game is up, and the whole scheme exploded. I would as soon undertake to evoke the ghost of Croesus. Dunshunner, said Bob very seriously, to be a man of information, you are possessed of marvelous few resources. I am quite ashamed of you. Now listen to me. I have thought deeply upon this subject, and am quite convinced that, with some little trouble, we may secure the cooperation of a most wealthy and influential body, one, too, that is generally supposed to have stood aloof from all speculation of the kind, and whose name would be a tower of strength in the moneyed quarters. I allude, continued Bob, reaching across for the kettle, to the great dissenting interest. The what? Cried I aghast. The great dissenting interest. You can't have failed to observe the row they have lately been making about Sunday traveling and education. Old Sam Solly, the coffin maker, is their principal spokesman here, and wherever he goes the rest will follow, like a flock of sheep bounding after a patriarchal ram. I propose, therefore, to wait upon him tomorrow, and request his cooperation in a scheme which is not only to prove profitable, but to make head against the lax principles of the present age. Leave me alone to tickle him. I consider his name, and those of 1 or 2 others belonging to the same meeting house, fellows with bank stock and all sorts of tin, as perfectly secure. These dissenters smell a premium from an almost incredible distance. We can fill up the rest of the committee with ciphers, and the whole thing is done. But the engineer, we must announce such an officer as a matter of course. I never thought of that, said Bob. Couldn't we hire a fellow from one of the steamboats? I fear that might get us into trouble. You know there are such things as gradients and sections to be prepared. But there's Waddy Sodder, the gas fitter, who failed the other day. He's a sort of civil engineer by trade, and will jump at the proposal like a trout at the tail of a mayfly. Agreed. Now then, let's fix the number of shares. This is our first experiment, and I think we ought to be moderate. No sound political economist is avaricious. Let us say 12,000, at £20 apiece. So be it. Well then, that's arranged. I'll see Solly and the rest tomorrow, settle with Sodder, and then write out the prospectus. You look in upon me in the evening, and we'll revise it together. Now, by your leave, let's have a Welsh rabbit and another tumbler to drink success and prosperity to the Glenmutchkin Railway. I confess that, when I rose on the morrow, with a slight headache and a tongue indifferently parched, I recalled to memory, not without perturbation of conscience and some internal qualms, the conversation of the previous evening. I felt relieved, however, after 2 spoonfuls of carbonate of soda, and a glance at the newspaper, wherein I perceived the announcement of no less than 4 other schemes equally preposterous with our own. But, after all, what right had I to assume that the Glenmutchkin project would prove an ultimate failure? I had not a scrap of statistical information that might entitle me to form such an opinion. At any rate, Parliament, by substituting the Board of Trade as an initiating body of inquiry, had created a responsible tribunal, and freed us from the chance of obloquy. I saw before me a vision of 6 months' steady gambling, at manifest advantage, in the shares, before a report could possibly be pronounced, or our proceedings be in any way overhauled. Of course, I attended that evening punctually at my friend M. Corkindale's. Bob was in high feather, for Solly no sooner heard of the principles upon which the railway was to be conducted, and his own nomination as a director, than he gave in his adhesion, and promised his unflinching support to the uttermost. The prospectus ran as follows. the necessity of a direct line of railway communication through the fertile and populous district known as the Valley of Glenmutchkin has been long felt and universally acknowledged. Independently of the surpassing grandeur of its mountain scenery, which shall immediately be referred to, and other considerations of even greater importance, Glenmutchkin is known to the capitalist as the most important breeding station in the Highlands of Scotland, and indeed as the great emporium from which the southern markets are supplied. It has been calculated by a most eminent authority that every acre in the strath is capable of rearing 20 head of cattle, and as it has been ascertained, after a careful admeasurement, that there are not less than 200,000 improvable acres immediately contiguous to the proposed line of railway, it may confidently be assumed that the number of cattle to be conveyed along the line will amount to 4 millions annually, which, at the lowest estimate, would yield a revenue larger, in proportion to the capital subscribed, than that of any railway as yet completed within the United Kingdom. From this estimate, the traffic in sheep and goats, with which the mountains are literally covered, has been carefully excluded, it having been found quite impossible, from its extent, to compute the actual revenue to be drawn from that most important branch. It may, however, be roughly assumed as from 17 to 19% upon the whole, after deduction of the working expenses. The population of Glenmutchkin is extremely dense. Its situation on the west coast has afforded it the means of direct communication with America, of which for many years the inhabitants have actively availed themselves. Indeed, the amount of exportation of livestock from this part of the Highlands to the western continent has more than once attracted the attention of Parliament. The manufactures are large and comprehensive, and include the most famous distilleries in the world. The minerals are most abundant, and among these may be reckoned quartz, porphyry, felspar, malachite, manganese, and basalt. At the foot of the valley, and close to the sea, lies the important village known as the Clocken of Inversturv. It is supposed by various eminent antiquaries to have been the capital of the Picts, and among the busy inroads of commercial prosperity, it still retains some interesting traces of its former grandeur. There is a large fishing station here, to which vessels from every nation resort, and the demand for foreign produce is daily and steadily increasing. As a sporting country, Glenmutchkin is unrivaled, but it is by the tourists that its beauties will most greedily be sought. These consist of every combination which plastic nature can afford: cliffs of unusual magnitude and grandeur, waterfalls only second to the sublime cascades of Norway, woods of which the bark is a remarkably valuable commodity. It need scarcely be added, to rouse the enthusiasm inseparable from this glorious glen, that here, in 1745, Prince Charles Edward Stuart, then in the zenith of his hopes, was joined by the brave Sir Gruger M. Gruger at the head of his devoted clan. The railway will be 12 miles long, and can be completed within 6 months after the Act of Parliament is obtained. The gradients are easy, and the curves obtuse. There are no viaducts of any importance, and only 4 tunnels along the whole length of the line. The shortest of these does not exceed 1.5 miles. In conclusion, the projectors of this railway beg to state that they have determined, as a principle, to set their face against all Sunday travelling whatsoever, and to oppose every bill which may hereafter be brought into Parliament, unless it shall contain a clause to that effect. It is also their intention to take up the cause of the poor and neglected stoker, for whose accommodation, and social, moral, religious, and intellectual improvement, a large stock of evangelical tracts will speedily be required. Tenders of these, in quantities of not less than 12,000, may be sent in to the interim secretary. Shares must be applied for within 10 days from the present date. By order of the Provisional Committee. Robert M. Corkindale, Secretary. There, said Bob, slapping down the prospectus on the table with as much triumph as if it had been the original of Magna Carta. What do you think of that? If it doesn't do the business effectually, I shall submit to be called a Dutchman. That last touch about the stoker will bring us in the subscriptions of the old ladies by the score. Very masterly indeed, said I. But who the deuce is Meek Mac Vichendub? A bona fide chief, I assure you, though a little reduced. I picked him up upon the Brumilol. His grandfather had an island somewhere to the west of the Hebrides, but it is not laid down in the maps. And the captain of M. Alcohol? A crack distiller. And the factor for Glentumblers? His principal customer. But bless you, my dear St. Mirrens! Don't bother yourself any more about the committee. They are as respectable a set, on paper at least, as you would wish to see of a summer's morning, and the beauty of it is that they will give us no manner of trouble. Now about the allocation. You and I must restrict ourselves to a couple of 1,000 shares apiece. That's only a third of the whole, but it won't do to be greedy. But Bob, consider! Where on earth are we to find the money to pay up the deposits? Can you, the principal director of the Glenmutchkin Railway, ask me, the secretary, such a question? Don't you know that any of the banks will give us tick to the amount of half the deposits? All that is settled already, and you can get your £2,000 whenever you please merely for the signing of a bill. Solly must get 1,000 according to stipulation, Jobson, Heckles, and Grabby, at least 500 apiece, and another 500, I should think, will exhaust the remaining means of the committee. So that, out of our whole stock, there remain just 5,000 shares to be allocated to the speculative and evangelical public. My eyes! Won't there be a scramble for them? Next day our prospectus appeared in the newspapers. It was read, canvassed, and generally approved of. During the afternoon I took an opportunity of looking into the Tontine, and while under shelter of the Glasgow Herald, my ears were solaced with such ejaculations as the following. I say, Jimsy, hae ye seen this grand new prospectus for a railway to Glenmutchkin? Aye. It looks no that ill. The Hieland lairds are pitting their best foremost. Will ye apply for shares? I think I'll tack TWA 100. Was Sir Pollux Fin Tremens? He'll be no the Ayrshire folk. He used to rin horses at the Paisley races. The devil he did, thought I. D'ye ken ony o' the directors, Jimsy? I ken Solly fine. Ye may depend on tea, it's a good thing if he's in tea, for he's a howkin body. Then it's sure to gie up. What prem? D'ye think it will bring? TWA pund a share, and maybe mair. Odie, I'll apply for 300. Heaven bless you, my dear countrymen, thought I, as I sallied forth to refresh myself with a basin of soup. Do but maintain this liberal and patriotic feeling, this thirst for national improvement, internal communication, and premiums, a short while longer, and I know whose fortune will be made. On the following morning my breakfast table was covered with shoals of letters, from fellows whom I scarcely ever had spoken to, or who, to use a Frunker phraseology, had scarcely ever condescended to speak to me, entreating my influence as a director to obtain them shares in the new undertaking. I never bore malice in my life, so I chalked them down, without favoritism, for a certain proportion. While engaged in this charitable work, the door flew open, and M. Corkindale, looking utterly haggard with excitement, rushed in. You may buy an estate whenever you please, Dunshunner, cried he. The world's gone perfectly mad. I have been to Blazes, the broker, and he tells me that the whole amount of the stock has been subscribed for 4 times over already, and he has not yet got in the returns from Edinburgh and Liverpool. Are they good names, though, Bob? Sure cards, none of your M. Kloskys and M. Alcohols? The first names in the city, I assure you, and most of them holders for investment. I wouldn't take 10 millions for their capital. Then the sooner we close the list the better. I think so too. I suspect a rival company will be out before long. Blazes says the shares are selling already conditionally on allotment, at 7 and 6 premium. The deuce they are. I say, Bob, since we have the cards in our hands, would it not be wise to favor them with a few hundreds at that rate? A bird in the hand, you know, is worth 2 in the bush, eh? I know no such maxim in political economy, replied the secretary. Are you mad, Dunshunner? How are the shares to go up, if it gets wind that the directors are selling already? Our business just now is to bull the line, not to bear it, and if you will trust me, I shall show them such an operation on the ascending scale as the stock exchange has not witnessed for this long and many a day. Then tomorrow I shall advertise in the papers that the committee, having received applications for 10 times the amount of stock, have been compelled, unwillingly, to close the lists. That will be a slap in the face to the dilatory gentlemen, and send up the shares like wildfire. Bob was right. No sooner did the advertisement appear than a simultaneous groan was uttered by some hundreds of disappointed speculators, who, with unwanted and unnecessary caution, had been anxious to see their way a little before committing themselves to our splendid enterprise. In consequence, they rushed into the market, with intense anxiety to make what terms they could at the earliest stage, and the 7 and 6 of premium was doubled in the course of a forenoon. The allocation passed over very peaceably. Solly, Heckles, Jobson, Grabby, and the captain of M. Alcohol, besides myself, attended, and took part in the business. We were also threatened with the presence of the M. Kloski and Vichenduib, but M. Corkindale, entertaining some reasonable doubts as to the effect which their corporeal appearance might have upon the representatives of the dissenting interest, had taken the precaution to get them snugly housed in a tavern, where an unbounded supply of gratuitous farintosh deprived us of the benefit of their experience. We, however, allotted them 20 shares apiece. Sir Pollux Van Tremmen sent a handsome, though rather illegible, letter of apology, dated from an island in Loch Lomond, where he was said to be detained on particular business. Mr. Solly, who officiated as our chairman, was kind enough, before parting, to pass a very flattering eulogium upon the excellence and candor of all the preliminary arrangements. It would now, he said, go forth to the public that the line was not, like some others he could mention, a mere bubble emanating from the stank of private interests, but a solid, lasting superstructure, based upon the principles of sound return for capital, and serious evangelical truth. Here. The time was fast approaching when the gravestone with the words, Hic Obit, chiseled upon it would be placed at the head of all the other lines which rejected the grand opportunity of conveying education to the stoker. The stoker, in his, Mr. Solly's, opinion, had a right to ask the all-important question, Am I not a man and a brother? Cheers. Much had been said and written lately about a work called Tracts for the Times. With the opinions contained in that publication he was not conversant, as it was conducted by persons of another community from that to which he, Mr. Solly, had the privilege to belong. But he hoped very soon, under the auspices of the Glenmutchkin Railway Company, to see a new periodical established, under the title of Tracts for the Trains. He never for a moment would relax his efforts to knock a nail into the coffin which, he might say, was already made and measured and cloth-covered for the reception of all establishments, and with these sentiments, and the conviction that the shares must rise, could it be doubted that he would remain a fast friend to the interests of this company forever? Much cheering. After having delivered this address, Mr. Solly affectionately squeezed the hands of his brother directors, and departed, leaving several of us much overcome. As, however, M. Corkindale had told me that every one of Solly's shares had been disposed of in the market the day before, I felt less compunction at having refused to allow that excellent man an extra 1,000 beyond the amount he had applied for, notwithstanding his broadest hints, and even private entreaties. Confound the greedy hypocrite, said Bob. Does he think we shall let him burke the line for nothing? No! Let him go to the brokers and buy his shares back, if he thinks they are likely to rise. I'll be bound he has made a cool 500 out of them already. On the day which succeeded the allocation, the following entry appeared in the Glasgow share lists. Direct Glenmutchkin Railway 15s. 60. 15s. 60. 16s. 15s. 60. 16s. 16s. 60. 16s. 60. 16s. 17s. 18s. 18s. 19s. 60. 21s. 21s. 22s. 60. 24s. 25s. 60. 27s. 29s. 29s. 60. 30s. 31s. They might go higher, and they ought to go higher, said Bob musingly. But there's not much more stock to come and go upon, and these two share sharks, Jobson and Grabby, I know, will be in the market tomorrow. We must not let them have the whip hand of us. I think upon the whole, Dunshunner, though it's letting them go dog cheap, that we ought to sell half our shares at the present premium, while there is a certainty of getting it. Why not sell the whole? I'm sure I have no objections to part with every stiver of the scrip on such terms. Perhaps, said Bob. Upon general principles you may be right. But then remember that we have a vested interest in the line. Vested interest be hanged! That's very well. At the same time, it is no use to kill your salmon in a hurry. The bulls have done their work pretty well for us, and we ought to keep something on hand for the bears. They are snuffing at it already. I could almost swear that some of those fellows who have sold today are working for a time bargain. We accordingly got rid of a couple of thousand shares, the proceeds of which not only enabled us to discharge the deposit loan, but left us a material surplus. Under these circumstances, a two-handed banquet was proposed and unanimously carried, the commencement of which I distinctly remember, but am rather dubious as to the end. So many stories have lately been circulated to the prejudice of railway directors that I think it my duty to state that this entertainment was scrupulously defrayed by ourselves and not carried to account either of the preliminary survey or the expenses of the provisional committee. Nothing effects so great a metamorphosis in the bearing of the outer man as a sudden change of fortune. The anemone of the garden differs scarcely more from its unpretending prototype of the woods than Robert M. Corkindale, Esq., secretary and projector of the Glenmutchkin Railway, differed from Bob M. Corkindale, the seedy frequenter of the Crow. In the days of yore, men eyed the surtout, napless at the velvet collar, and preternaturally white at the seams, which Bob vouchsafed to wear with looks of dim suspicion, as if some faint reminiscence, similar to that which is said to recall the memory of a former state of existence, suggested to them a notion that the garment had once been their own. Indeed, his whole appearance was then wonderfully second-hand. Now he had cast his slough. A most undeniable taglione, with trimmings just bordering upon frogs, gave dignity to his demeanor and twofold amplitude to his chest. The horn eyeglass was exchanged for one of purest gold, the dingy highlows for well-waxed Wellingtons, the paisley fogle for the fabric of the China loom. Moreover, he walked with a swagger, and affected in common conversation a peculiar dialect which he opined to be the purest English, but which no one, except a bagman, could be reasonably expected to understand. His pockets were invariably crammed with share lists, and he quoted, if he did not comprehend, the money article from the Times. This sort of assumption, though very ludicrous in itself, goes down wonderfully. Bob gradually became a sort of authority, and his opinions got quoted on 'Change. He was no ass, notwithstanding his peculiarities, and made good use of his opportunity. For myself, I bore my new dignities with an air of modest meekness. A certain degree of starchness is indispensable for a railway director. If he means to go forward in his high calling and prosper, he must abandon all juvenile eccentricities, and aim at the appearance of a decided enemy to free trade in the article of wild oats. Accordingly, as the first step toward respectability, I issued colored waistcoats and gave out that I was a marrying man. No man under 40, unless he is a positive idiot, will stand forth as a theoretical bachelor. It is all nonsense to say that there is anything unpleasant in being courted. Attention, whether from male or female, tickles the vanity, and although I have a reasonable, and I hope, not unwholesome regard for the gratification of my other appetites, I confess that this same vanity is by far the most poignant of the whole. I therefore surrendered myself freely to the soft allurements thrown in my way by such matronly denizens of Glasgow as were possessed of stock in the shape of marriageable daughters, and walked the more readily into their toils because every party, though nominally for the purposes of tea, wound up with a hot supper, and something hotter still by way of assisting the digestion. I don't know whether it was my determined conduct at the allocation, my territorial title, or a most exaggerated idea of my circumstances, that worked upon the mind of Mr. Solly. Possibly it was a combination of the three. But sure enough, few days had elapsed before I received a formal card of invitation to a tea and serious conversation. Now, serious conversation is a sort of thing that I never shone in, possibly because my early studies were framed in a different direction. But as I really was unwilling to offend the respectable coffin-maker, and as I found that the captain of Alcohol, a decided trump in his way, had also received a summons, I notified my acceptance. Alcohol and I went together. The captain, an enormous brawny Celt, with superhuman whiskers and a shock of the fieriest hair, had figged himself out, more majorum, in the full Highland costume. I never saw Rob Roy on the stage look half so dignified or ferocious. He glittered from head to foot with dirk, pistol, and skeened HU, and at least 100 weight of cairngorms cast a prismatic glory around his person. I felt quite abashed beside him. We were ushered into Mr. Solly's drawing-room. Round the walls, and at considerable distances from each other, were seated about a dozen characters, male and female, all of them dressed in sable, and wearing countenances of woe. Solly advanced, and wrung me by the hand with so piteous an expression of visage that I could not help thinking some awful catastrophe had just befallen his family. "You are welcome, Mr. Dunshunner, welcome to my humble tabernacle. Let me present you to Mrs. Solly." And a lady, who seemed to have bathed in the yellow sea, rose from her seat, and favored me with a profound curtsy. "My daughter, Miss Selina Solly." I felt in my brain the scorching glance of the two darkest eyes it ever was my fortune to behold, as the beauteous Selina looked up from the perusal of her handkerchief hem. It was a pity that the other features were not corresponding, for the nose was flat, and the mouth of such dimensions that a harlequin might have jumped down it with impunity, but the eyes were splendid. In obedience to a sign from the hostess, I sank into a chair beside Selina, and, not knowing exactly what to say, hazarded some observation about the weather. "Yes, it is indeed a suggestive season. How deeply, Mr. Dunshunner, we ought to feel the pensive progress of autumn toward a soft and premature decay. I always think, about this time of the year, that nature is falling into a consumption." "To be sure, ma'am," said I, rather taken aback by this style of colloquy. "The trees are looking devilishly hectic." "Ah, you have remarked that too? Strange. It was but yesterday that I was wandering through Kelvin Grove, and as the phantom breeze brought down the withered foliage from the spray, I thought how probable it was that they might ere long rustle over young and glowing hearts deposited prematurely in the tomb." This, which struck me as a very passable imitation of Dickens's pathetic writings, was a poser. In default of language, I looked Miss Solly straight in the face, and attempted a substitute for a sigh. I was rewarded with a tender glance. "Ah," said she, "I see you are a congenial spirit. How delightful, and yet how rare, it is to meet with any one who thinks in unison with yourself. Do you ever walk in the necropolis, Mr. Dunshunner? It is my favorite haunt of a morning. There we can wean ourselves, as it were, from life, and beneath the melancholy yew and cypress, anticipate the setting star. How often there have I seen the procession, the funeral of some very, very little child." "Selina, my love," said Mrs. Solly, "have the kindness to ring for the cookies." I, as in duty bound, started up to save the fair enthusiast the trouble, and was not sorry to observe my seat immediately occupied by a very cadaverous gentleman, who was evidently jealous of the progress I was rapidly making. Solly, with an air of great mystery, informed me that this was a Mr. Dalgleish of Racksmith Rapple, the representative of an ancient Scottish family who claimed an important heritable office. The name, I thought, was familiar to me, but there was something in the appearance of Mr. Dalgleish which, notwithstanding the smiles of Miss Selina, rendered a rivalship in that quarter utterly out of the question. I hate injustice, so let me do the honor and description to the Solly banquet. The tea-urn most literally corresponded to its name. The table was decked out with divers platters, containing seed cakes cut into rhomboids, almond biscuits, and ratafia drops. Also on the sideboard there were 2 salvers, each of which contained a congregation of glasses, filled with port and sherry. The former fluid, as I afterward ascertained, was of the kind advertised as curious, and proffered for sale at the reasonable rate of 16 shillings per dozen. The banquet, on the whole, was rather peculiar than enticing, and for the life of me, I could not divest myself of the idea that the selfsame viands had figured, not long before, as funeral refreshments at a dirge. No such suspicion seemed to cross the mind of M. Alcohol, who hitherto had remained uneasily surveying his nails in a corner, but at the first symptom of food started forward, and was in the act of making a clean sweep of the china, when Solly proposed the singular preliminary of a hymn. The hymn was accordingly sung. I am thankful to say it was such a one as I never heard before or expect to hear again, and unless it was composed by the Reverend Saunders Peden in an hour of paroxysm on the moors, I cannot conjecture the author. After this original symphony, tea was discussed, and after tea, to my amazement, more hot brandy and water than I ever remember to have seen circulated at the most convivial party. Of course, this effected a radical change in the spirits and conversation of the circle. It was again my lot to be placed by the side of the fascinating Selina, whose sentimentality gradually thawed away beneath the influence of sundry sips, which she accepted with a delicate reluctance. This time Dalgleish of Racksmith Rappel had not the remotest chance. Alcohol got furious, sang Gaelic songs, and even delivered a sermon in genuine Erse, without incurring a rebuke, while, for my own part, I must needs confess that I waxed unnecessarily amorous, and the last thing I recollect was the pressure of Mr. Solly's hand at the door, as he denominated me his dear boy, and hoped I would soon come back and visit Mrs. Solly and Selina. The recollection of these passages next morning was the surest antidote to my return. 3 weeks had elapsed, and still the Glenmutchkin Railway shares were at a premium, though rather lower than when we sold. Our engineer, Waddy Sodder, returned from his first survey of the line, along with an assistant who really appeared to have some remote glimmerings of the science and practice of mensuration. It seemed, from a verbal report, that the line was actually practicable, and the survey would have been completed in a very short time, if, according to the account of Sodder, there had been AEVs in the glen. But ever sin the distillery stopped it, and that was TWA year last Martinmas, there wasna a whole war a Christian could lay his head, muckle less get white sugar to his toddy, for by the change house at the Clocken, and the auld lucky that keepit it was served for Faughton why the palsy, and maced in the dead thraws. There was naebody else living within 12 miles o' the line, barring a taxman, a lammeter, and a baldy. We had some difficulty in preventing Mr. Sodder from making this report open and patent to the public, which premature disclosure might have interfered materially with the preparation of our traffic tables, not to mention the marketable value of the shares. We therefore kept him steadily at work out of Glasgow, upon a very liberal allowance, to which, apparently, he did not object. "Dunshunner," said M. Corkindale to me one day, "I suspect that there is something going on about our railway more than we are aware of. Have you observed that the shares are preternaturally high just now? So much the better. Let's sell. I did so this morning, both yours and mine, at £2 10 premium." "The deuce you did! Then we're out of the whole concern." "Not quite. If my suspicions are correct, there's a good deal more money yet to be got from the speculation. Somebody had been bulling the stock without orders, and, as they can have no information which we are not perfectly up to, depend upon it, it is done for a purpose. I suspect Solly and his friends. They have never been quite happy since the allocation, and I caught him yesterday pumping our broker in the back shop. We'll see in a day or two. If they are beginning a bearing operation, I know how to catch them." And in effect, the bearing operation commenced. Next day, heavy sales were effected for delivery in 3 weeks, and the stock, as if waterlogged, began to sink. The same thing continued for the following 2 days, until the premium became nearly nominal. In the meantime, Bob and I, in conjunction with 2 leading capitalists whom we let into the secret, bought up steadily every share that was offered, and at the end of a fortnight we found that we had purchased rather more than double the amount of the whole original stock. Solly and his disciples, who, as M. Corkindale suspected, were at the bottom of the whole transaction, having beered to their heart's content, now came into the market to purchase, in order to redeem their engagements. I have no means of knowing in what frame of mind Mr. Solly spent the Sunday, or whether he had recourse for mental consolation to Peden, but on Monday morning he presented himself at my door in full funeral costume, with about 1/4 mile of crape swathed round his hat, black gloves, and a countenance infinitely more doleful than if he had been attending the interment of his beloved wife. "Walk in, Mr. Solly," said I cheerfully. "What a long time it is since I have had the pleasure of seeing you, too long indeed for brother directors. How are Mrs. Solly and Miss Selina? Won't you take a cup of coffee?" "Grass, sir, grass," said Mr. Solly, with a sigh like the groan of a furnace bellows. We are all flowers of the oven, weak, erring creatures, every one of us. Ah, Mr. Dunshunner, you have been a great stranger at Lyquake Terrace. Take a muffin, Mr. Solly. Anything new in the railway world? My dear sir, my good Mr. Augustus Reginald, I wanted to have some serious conversation with you on that very point. I am afraid there is something far wrong indeed in the present state of our stock. Why, to be sure it is high, but that, you know, is a token of the public confidence in the line. After all, the rise is nothing compared to that of several English railways, and individually, I suppose, either of us has any reason to complain. I don't like it, said Solly, watching me over the margin of his coffee cup. I don't like it. It savors too much of gambling for a man of my habits. Selina, who is a sensible girl, has serious qualms on the subject. Then why not get out of it? I have no objection to run the risk, and if you like to transact with me, I will pay you ready money for every share you have at the present market price. Solly writhed uneasily in his chair. Will you sell me 500, Mr. Solly? Say the word and it is a bargain. A time bargain? Quavered the coffin maker. No, money down, and scrip handed over. I can't. The fact is, my dear young friend, I have sold all my stock already. Then permit me to ask, Mr. Solly, what possible objection you can have to the present aspect of affairs. You do not surely suppose that we are going to issue new shares and bring down the market, simply because you have realized at a handsome premium? A handsome premium! Oh Lord! Moaned Solly. Why, what did you get for them? 4, 3, and 2.5. A very considerable profit indeed, said I, and you ought to be abundantly thankful. We shall talk this matter over at another time, Mr. Solly, but just now I must beg you to excuse me. I have a particular engagement this morning with my broker, rather a heavy transaction to settle, and so… It's no use beating about the bush any longer, said Mr. Solly, in an excited tone, at the same time dashing down his crepe-covered castor on the floor. Did you ever see a ruined man with a large family? Look at me, Mr. Dunshunner, I'm one, and you've done it. Mr. Solly! Are you in your senses? That depends on circumstances. Haven't you been buying stock lately? I am glad to say I have, 2,000 Glenmuchkins, I think, and this is the day of delivery. Well, then, can't you see how the matter stands? It was I who sold them. Well, Mother of Moses, sir! Don't you see I'm ruined? By no means, but you must not swear. I pay over the money for your scrip, and you pocket a premium. It seems to me a very simple transaction. But I tell you I haven't got the scrip, cried Solly, gnashing his teeth, while the cold beads of perspiration gathered largely on his brow. That is very unfortunate. Have you lost it? No. The devil tempted me, and I oversold. There was a very long pause, during which I assumed an aspect of serious and dignified rebuke. Is it possible? Said I, in a low tone, after the manner of Kean's offended fathers. What? You, Mr. Solly, the stoker's friend, the enemy of gambling, the father of Selina, condescend to so equivocal a transaction? You amaze me! But I never was the man to press heavily on a friend. Here Solly brightened up. Your secret is safe with me, and it shall be your own fault if it reaches the ears of the session. Pay me over the difference at the present market price, and I release you of your obligation. Then I'm in the Gazette, that's all, said Solly doggedly. And a wife and 9 beautiful babes upon the parish. I had hoped other things from you, Mr. Dunshunner. I thought you and Selina. Nonsense, man! Nobody goes into the Gazette just now. It will be time enough when the general crash comes. Out with your checkbook, and write me an order for 24,000. Confound fractions! In these days one can afford to be liberal. I haven't got it, said Solly. You have no idea how bad our trade has been of late, for nobody seems to think of dying. I have not sold a gross of coffins this fortnight. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you 5,000 down in cash, and 10,000 in shares, further I can't go. Now, Mr. Solly, said I, I may be blamed by worldly-minded persons for what I am going to do, but I am a man of principle, and feel deeply for the situation of your amiable wife and family. I bear no malice, though it is quite clear that you intended to make me the sufferer. Pay me 15,000 over the counter, and we cry quits forever. Won't you take the Kamlachie Cemetery shares? They are sure to go up. No! 1,200 Cowcaddens water, with an issue of new stock next week? Not if they disseminated the gauges. 1,000 Ramshorn gas, 4% guaranteed until the act? Not if they promised 20, and melted down the sun in their retort. Blowery iron? Best spec going. No, I tell you once for all. If you don't like my offer, and it is an uncommonly liberal one, say so, and I'll expose you this afternoon upon change. Well then, there's a check. But may the— Stop, sir! Any such profane expressions, and I shall insist upon the original bargain. So then, now we're quits. I wish you a very good morning, Mr. Solly, and better luck next time. Pray remember me to your amiable family. The door had hardly closed upon the discomfited coffin-maker, and I was still in the preliminary steps of an extempore pas seul, intended as the outward demonstration of exceeding inward joy, when Bob M. Corkindale entered. I told him the result of the morning's conference. You have let him off too easily, said the political economist. Had I been his creditor, I certainly should have sacked the shares into the bargain. There is nothing like rigid dealing between man and man. I am contented with moderate profits, said I. Besides, the image of Selina overcame me. How goes it with Jobson and Grabby? Jobson had paid, and Grabby compounded. Heckles, may he die an evil death, has repudiated, become a lame duck and waddled, but no doubt his estate will pay a dividend. So then, we are clear of the whole Glenmuchkin business, and at a handsome profit. A fair interest for the outlay of capital, nothing more. But I'm not quite done with the concern yet. How so? Not another bearing operation? No, that cock would hardly fight. But you forget that I am secretary to the company, and have a small account against them for services already rendered. I must do what I can to carry the bill through Parliament, and, as you have now sold your whole shares, I advise you to resign from the direction, go down straight to Glenmuchkin, and qualify yourself for a witness. We shall give you 5 guineas a day, and pay all your expenses. Not a bad notion. But what has become of McCloskey, and the other fellow with the jaw-breaking name? Vichendub? I have looked after their interests as in duty bound, sold their shares at a large premium, and dispatched them to their native hills on annuities. And Sir Pollexfen? Died yesterday of spontaneous combustion. As the company seemed breaking up, I thought I could not do better than take M. Corkindale's hint, and accordingly betook myself to Glenmuchkin, along with the captain of M. Alcohol, and we quartered ourselves upon the factor for Glentumblers. We found Waddy Sodder very shaky, and his assistant also lapsing into habits of painful inebriety. We saw little of them except of an evening, for we shot and fished the whole day, and made ourselves remarkably comfortable. By singular good luck, the plans and sections were lodged in time, and the Board of Trade very handsomely reported in our favor, with a recommendation of what they were pleased to call the Glenmuchkin system, and a hope that it might generally be carried out. What this system was, I never clearly understood, but of course, none of us had any objections. This circumstance gave an additional impetus to the shares, and they once more went up. I was, however, too cautious to plunge a second time into Charybdis, but M. Corkindale did, and again emerged with plunder. When the time came for the parliamentary contest, we all emigrated to London. I still recollect, with lively satisfaction, the many pleasant days we spent in the metropolis at the company's expense. There were just a neat 50 of us, and we occupied the whole of a hotel. The discussion before the committee was long and formidable. We were opposed by 4 other companies who patronized lines, of which the nearest was at least 100 miles distant from Glenmuchkin, but as they founded their opposition upon dissent from the Glenmuchkin system, generally, the committee allowed them to be heard. We fought for 3 weeks a most desperate battle, and might in the end have been victorious, had not our last antagonist, at the very close of his case, pointed out no less than 73 fatal errors in the parliamentary plan deposited by the unfortunate Sodder. Why this was not done earlier, I never exactly understood. It may be that our opponents, with gentlemanly consideration, were unwilling to curtail our sojourn in London, and their own. The drama was now finally closed, and after all preliminary expenses were paid, 6d. per share was returned to the holders upon surrender of their scrip. Such is an accurate history of the origin, rise, progress, and fall of the direct Glenmutchkin Railway. It contains a deep moral, if anybody has sense enough to see it. If not, I have a new project in my eye for next session, of which timely notice shall be given. Thrawn Janet, by Robert Louis Stevenson. The Reverend Murdoch Soulis was long minister of the moorland parish of Balwearie, in the Vale of Dula. A severe, bleak-faced old man, dreadful to his hearers, he dwelt in the last years of his life, without relative or servant or any human company, in the small and lonely manse under the hanging shaw. In spite of the iron composure of his features, his eye was wild, scared, and uncertain, and when he dwelt, in private admonitions, on the future of the impenitent, it seemed as if his eye pierced through the storms of time to the terrors of eternity. Many young persons, coming to prepare themselves against the season of the Holy Communion, were dreadfully affected by his talk. He had a sermon on Ipet. V8. The Devil as a Roaring Lion, on the Sunday after every 17th of August, and he was accustomed to surpass himself upon that text both by the appalling nature of the matter and the terror of his bearing in the pulpit. The children were frightened into fits, and the old looked more than usually oracular, and were, all that day, full of those hints that Hamlet deprecated. The manse itself, where it stood by the water of Dula among some thick trees, with the shaw overhanging it on the one side, and on the other many cold, moorish hilltops rising toward the sky, had begun, at a very early period of Mr. Soulis's ministry, to be avoided in the dusk hours by all who valued themselves upon their prudence. And Gidman sitting at the Clocken alehouse shook their heads together at the thought of passing late by that uncanny neighborhood. There was one spot, to be more particular, which was regarded with especial awe. The manse stood between the high road and the water of Dula, with a gable to each. Its bank was toward the kirk town of Balwearie, nearly half a mile away. In front of it, a bare garden, hedged with thorn, occupied the land between the river and the road. The house was 2 stories high, with 2 large rooms on each. It opened not directly on the garden, but on a causewayed path, or passage, giving on the road on the one hand, and closed on the other by the tall willows and elders that bordered on the stream. And it was this strip of causeway that enjoyed among the young parishioners of Balwearie so infamous a reputation. The minister walked there often after dark, sometimes groaning aloud in the instancy of his unspoken prayers, and when he was from home, and the manse door was locked, the more daring schoolboys ventured, with beating hearts, to follow my leader across that legendary spot. This atmosphere of terror, surrounding, as it did, a man of God of spotless character and orthodoxy, was a common cause of wonder and subject of inquiry among the few strangers who were led by chance or business into that unknown, outlying country. But many even of the people of the parish were ignorant of the strange events which had marked the first year of Mr. Soulis's ministrations, and among those who were better informed, some were naturally reticent, and others shy of that particular topic. Now and again, only, one of the older folk would warm into courage over his 3rd tumbler, and recount the cause of the minister's strange looks and solitary life. 50 years syne, when Mr. Soulis came first into Balwearie, he was still a young man, a callant, the folk said, full book learnin' and grand at the exposition, but, as was natural in sae young a man, why nae leave in experience in religion. The younger sort were greatly taken by his gifts and his gab, but all concerned, serious men and women were moved even to prayer for the young man, whom they took to be a self-deceiver, and the parish that was like to be sae ill supplied. It was before the days o' the moderates, weary afa them, but ill things are like guid, they baith come bit by bit, a pickle at a time, and there were folk even then that said the Lord had left the college professors to their ain devices, and the lads that went to study why them wad hae done mair and better sittin' in a peat bog, like their forebears of the persecution, why a Bible under their oxter and a spirit o' prayer in their heart. There was nae doubt, onyway, but that Mr. Soulis had been owling at the college. He was careful and troubled for mony things besides the ae thing needful. He had a feck o' books wy him, mair than had ever been seen before in a that presbytery, and a sair work the carrier had wy them, for they were alike to have smored in the deals hag between this and Kilmackerley. They were books o' divinity, to be sure, or so they said them, but the serious were o' opinion there was little service for sae mony, when the hail o' God's word would gang in the nook of a plaid. Then he wad sit half the day and half the nicht forby, which was scant decent, writin', nae less. And first they were feared he wad read his sermons, and syne it proved he was writin' a book himsel, which was surely no fittin' for ane of his years in SMA experience. Onyway, it behooved him to get an auld, decent wife to keep the manse for him and see to his bit dinners, and he was recommended to an auld limmer, Janet M. Clower, they said her, and sae far left to himsel as to be our persuaded. There was mony advised him to the contrar, for Janet was mair than suspected by the best folk in Bewery. Lang or that, she had had a wean to a dragoon, she hadn't come for it for maybe 30 year, and bairns had seen her mumblin' to hersel up on Keys Lone in the gloamin'. Whilk was an unco time and place for a God-fearin' woman. Howsoever, it was the laird himsel that had first told the minister o' Janet, and in they days he wad have gained a far gate to pleasure the laird. When folk told him that Janet was sib to the deal, it was a superstition by his way of it, and when they cast up the Bible to him, and the witch of Ender, he wad threep it down their thrapples that their days were again by, and the deal was mercifully restrained. Weel, when it got about the clock and that Janet M. Clower was to be servant at the manse, the folk were fair mad why her and him together, and some o' the guidwives had nae better today than get round her door cheeks and charge her why that was kent again her, frae the sodgers bairn to John Tamson's TWA Kai. She was nae great speaker, folk usually let her gang her ain gait, and she let them gang theirs, why neither fair guidn nor fair guid day. But when she buckled to, she had a tongue to deave the miller. Up she got, and there wasn't an auld story in Bewery but she gart somebody lope for it that day. They couldn't say a thing but she could say TWA to it, till, at the hinder end, the guidwives up and clawed hot of her, and clawed the coats aff her back, and peewed her down the clock into the water o' Dilla, to see if she were a witch or no, some or drown. The carline skirled till ye could hear her at the Hangen Shaw, and she folk like 10. There was mony a guid wife beret the mark of her niece day and mony a lang day after, and just in the headest o' the collie shangy, was suld come up for his sins, but the new minister. Women, said he, and he had a grand voice, I charge you in the Lord's name to let her go. Janet ran to him, she was fair would wy terror, and clanged to him, and prayed him, for Christ's sake, save her frae the cummers, and they, for their part, told him a that was Kent, and maybe mair. Woman, says he to Janet, is this true? As the Lord sees me, says she, as the Lord made me, no a word o' tea, for by the bairn, says she, I've been a decent woman o' my days. Will you, says Mr. Soulis, in the name of God, and before me, his unworthy minister, renounce the devil and his works? Weel, it wad appear that, when he asked Kitty that, she gave a girn that fairly fricked at them that saw her, and they could hear her teeth play dirl together in her chaffs. But there was naething for it but the ae way or the ither, and Janet lifted up her hand and renounced the deal before them. And now, says Mr. Soulis to the guidwives, home with ye, one and all, and pray to God for his forgiveness. And he gied Janet his arm, though she had little on her but a sark, and took her up the clock into her ain door like a leddy of the land, and her screegin and logan as was a scandal to be heard. There were mony grave folk lang ower their prayers that nicht, but when the morn cam there was sick a fear fell upon a Bewery that the bairns hid theirsels, and even the men folk stood and keekit frae their doors. For there was Janet comin' down the clockin, her or her likeness, none could tell, why her neck thrawn, and her hide on ae side, like a body that has been hangit, and a girn on her face like an unstreakit corp. By and by they got used wy't, and even speered at her to ken what was wrang. But frae that day forth she couldn't speak like a Christian woman, but slavered and played click wy her teeth like a pair o' shears. And frae that day forth the name o' God cam never on her lips. Whiles she wad try to say it, but it mickney be. Them that can best said least. But they never jide that thing the name o' Janet Emclower, for the old Janet, by their way o' tea, was in muckle hell that day. But the minister was either to haud nor to bind. He preached about naething but the folks' cruelty that had gien her a stroke of the palsy. He skelped the bairns that meddled her, and he had her up to the manse that same nicht, and dwalled there a his lane wy her under the hangen shaw. Weel, time gied by, and the idler sort commenced to think mair lickly o' that black business. The minister was weel thocht o'. He was aye late at the writing. Folk wad see his ken doon by the dilla water after twal at e'en, and he seemed pleased wy himsel and up sittin' as at first, though a body could see that he was dwining. As for Janet, she cam and she gied. If she didn't speak muckle afore, it was reason she should speak less then. She meddled naebody, but she was an eldritch thing to see, and none wad hae mistrysted wy her for be a weary glebe. About the end o' July there cam a spell o' weather, the like o' tea never was in that countryside. It was lown and het and heartless. The herds couldn't win up the Black Hill, the bairns were ower wearied to play, and yet it was gousty too. Why claps o' het one that rumbled in the glens, and bits o' shores that slocken naething. We I thocht it but to thunder on the morn, but the morn cam, and the morn's morning, and it was aye the same uncanny weather, sair on folks and bestial. Of a that were the war, nane suffered like Mr. Sully's. He could neither sleep nor eat, he told his elders, and when he wasn't writin' at his weary book, he wad be stravagant ower the countryside like a man possessed, when a body else was blithe to keep collar ben the house. Abune Hangen Shaw, in the bield o' the Black Hill, there's a bit enclosed grund wy an iron yurt, and it seems, in the old days, that was the kirkyard o' Bewery, and consecrated by the papists before the blessed licht shone upon the kingdom. It was a great house, o' Mr. Sully's onyway. There he would sit and consider his sermons and indits a bieldy bit. Weel, as he came ower the wast end o' the Black Hill, ae day, he saw first TWA, and syne Fowler, and syne Stephen Corby Craws fleeing round and round abune the auld kirkyard. They flew leg and heavy, and squawked ither as they gied, and it was clear to Mr. Sully's that something had put them frae their ordiner. He wasna easy flayed, and gied strocked up to the was, and what suld he find there but a man, or the appearance of a man, sittin' in the inside upon a grave. He was of a great stature, and black as hell, and his een were singular to see. Mr. Sully's had heard tell o' black men, mony's the time, but there was something unco about this black man that daunted him. Het as he was, he took a kind o' cauld grew in the marrow o' his banes, but up he spak for a that, and says he, "My friend, are you a stranger in this place?" The black man answered never a word. He got upon his feet, and began to hurtle to the wa on the far side, but he I looked at the minister, and the minister stood and looked back, till in a minute the black man was ower the wine rinnin' for the bield o' the trees. Mr. Sully's, he hardly kenned why, ran after him, but he was sair for jasket why his walk in the het, unhalesome weather, and rin as he liked, he got nae mair than a glisk o' the black man amang the birks, till he won down to the foot o' the hillside, and there he saw him ance mair, gone, hap, step, and lope, ower dilla water to the manse. Mr. Sully's wasna weel pleased that this fearsome gangrel sold mak sa free wy be weary manse, and he ran the harder, and wet shoon, ower the burn, and up the walk, but the deil a black man was there to see. He stepped out upon the road, but there was naebody there. He gied ower the garden, but nae black man. At the hinder end, and a bit feared as was but natural, he lifted the hasp and into the manse, and there was Janet Emclower before his een, why her thrawn Craig, and nane sa pleased to see him. And he I minded sinsyne, when first he set his een upon her, he had the same called and deity grew. "Janet," says he, "have you seen a black man?" "A black man?" quoth she. "Save us a! Ye read no wise, minister. There's nae black man in a Bewery." But she didna speak plain, ye maun understand, but yammered, like a pownie wy the bit in its moo. "Weel," says he, "Janet, if there was nae black man, I have spoken with the accuser of the brethren." And he sat down like ane wy a fever, and his teeth chittered in his hide. "Hoots," says she, "think shame to yoursel, minister," and gied him a drap brandy that she keeped aye by her. Sign Mr. Sully's geed into his study amang a his books. It's a lang, leg, mirk charmer, perishing cold in winter, and no very dry even in the top o' the simmer, for the manse stands near the burn. S.E. down he sat, and thocht of a that had come and gane since he was in Beweary, and his hame, and the days when he was a bairn and ran daffin on the braes, and that black man I ran in his hide like the o'ercome of a saying. Aye, the mair he thocht o' the black man. He tried the prayer, and the words wouldn't come to him, and he tried, they say, to write at his book, but he couldn't mak name mair o' that. There was whiles he thought the black man was at his oxter, and the swat stood upon him called as well water, and there was other whiles when he cam to himsel like a christened bairn and minded naething. The upshot was that he gied to the window and stood glowerin' at Dula water. The trees are unco thick, and the water lies deep and black under the manse, and there was Janet washing the clasy her coats kilted. She had her back to the minister, and he for his part hardly kenned what he was looking at. Sighing she turned round, and shawed her face. Mr. Sully's had the same cauld grew as twice that day afore, and it was borne in upon him what folks said, that Janet was daid lang syne, and this was a bogle in her clay-cauld flesh. He drew back a pickle and he scanned her narrowly. She was trampin' in the clas, cronin to hersel, and good guide us, but it was a fearsome face. While she sang louder, but there was nae man born o' woman that could tell the words o' her sang, and while she looked sidelang down, but there was naething there for her to look at. There gied a scunner through the flesh upon his banes, and that was heathen's advertisement. But Mr. Sully's just blamed himsel, he said, to think sa ill of a puir all afflicted wife that hadn't a friend for by himsel, and he put up a bit prayer for him and her, and drank a little caller water, for his heart rose again the meat, and gied up to his naked bed in the gloaming. That was a nicht that has never been forgotten in Beweary, the nicht o' the 17th of August, 1712. It had been het afore, as I hae said, but that nicht it was hetter than ever. The sun gied down amang unco-looking clouds. It fell as mirk as the pit, no a star, no a breath o' wund, ye couldn't see your han afore your face, and even the auld folk quist the covers frae their beds and lay petchin' for their breath. Why a that he had upon his mind, it was gey and unlikely Mr. Sully's wad get muckle sleep. He lay and he tumbled, the good, collar bed that he got into brunt his very banes, whiles he slept, and whiles he wakened, whiles he heard the time o' nicht, and whiles a tyke yowlin' up the muir, as if somebody was daid, whiles he thocht he heard bogles claverin' in his lug, and whiles he saw spunkies in the room. He behooved, he judged, to be sick, and sick he was, little he jealoused the sickness. At the hinder end, he got a clearness in his mind, sat up in his sark on the bedside, and fell thinkin' ance mair o' the black man and Janet. He couldn't will tell how, maybe it was the call to his feet, but it cam in upon him why a spate that there was some connection between twa, and that either or baith o' them were bogles. And just at that moment, in Janet's room, which was neast to his, there cam a stamp o' feet as if men were worslin', and then a loud bang, and then a one gied reichling round the fower quarters of the house, and then a was ance mair as silent as the grave. Mr. Sully's was feared for neither man nor devil. He got his tinder box, unlit a candle, and made 3 steps o' t hour to Janet's door. It was on the hasp, and he pushed it open, and keeked baldly in. It was a big room, as big as the minister's een, and plenished why grand, all solid gear, for he had naething else. There was a fower-posted bed wi' all tapestry, and a braw cabinet of ike, that was fu' o' the minister's divinity books, and put there to be out o' the gate, and a wheen duds o' Janet's lying here and there about the floor. But nae Janet could Mr. Sully see, nor ony sign of a contention. In he gied, and there's few that wad hae followed him, and looked around, and listened. But there was naethin to be heard neither inside the manse nor in a Beweary parish, and naethin to be seen but the muckle shadows tinnin' round the candle. And then at aince the minister's heart played dunt and stood stock still, and a cauld one blew amang the hairs o' his hide. What an a weary sicht was that for the puir man's een! For there was Janet hangin' frae a nail beside the auld-ike cabinet, her hide I lay on her shouter, her een were steeked, the tongue projected frae her mouth, and her heels were twa feet clear abune the floor. God forgive us all, thought Mr. Sulis. Poor Janet's dead. He came a step nearer to the corpse, and then his heart fair whammeled in his inside. For, by what cantrip it wad ill beseem a man to judge, she was hinging frae a single nail and by a single worst thread for darneen hose. It's an awfu' thing to be your lane at nicht why sick and prodigies o' darkness. But Mr. Sulis was strong in the Lord. He turned and gied his ways o' that room, and lockit the door ahint him, and step by step doon the stairs, as heavy as lead, and set doon the candle on the table at the stair foot. He couldn't pray, he couldn't think, he was dreepin' why call swat, and naething could he hear but the dun-dun-duntin' o' his ain heart. He micht maybe have stood there an hour, or maybe twa, he minded little, when o' a sudden he heard a leg, uncanny steer upstairs, a foot gied to and fro in the chamber where the corp was hingin'. Syne the door was opened, though he minded weel that he had lockit it, and syne there was a step upon the landin', and it seemed to him as if the corp was lookin' ower the tail and down upon him where he stood. He took up the candle again, for he couldn't want the licht, and, as softly as ever he could, gied strocht out o' the manse to the far end o' the causeway. It was I Pidmark, the flame o' the candle, when he set it on the grund, brunt steady and clear as in a room, naething moved, but the dull o' water seep in and sabin doon the glen, and yon unhaly footstep that came plodding down the stairs inside the manse. He kenned the foot ower weel, for it was Janet's, and at ilka step that came a wee thing nearer, the cauld got deeper in his vitals. He commended his soul to him that made and keepit him. And, O Lord, said he, give me strength this night to war against the powers of evil. By this time the foot was comin' through the passage for the door. He could hear a hand skirt along the wa, as if the fearsome thing was feelin' for its way. The saws tossed and main thegither, alongside came ower the hills, the flame o' the candle was blawn a boot, and there stood the corp of Thrawn Janet, why her grogram gown and her black mutch, why the hide eye upon the shouter, and the gurn still upon the face o' leave in, ye wad hae said, dade, as Mr. Sulis will kenned, upon the threshold o' the manse. It's a strange thing that the soul of man should be thurled into his perishable body, but the minister saw that, and his heart didn't break. She didn't stand there lang, she began to move again, and came slowly toward Mr. Sulis where he stood under the saws. O' the life o' his body, o' the strength o' his spirit, were glowerin' frae his een. It seemed she was gone to speak, but wanted words, and made a sign wi' the left hand. There came a clap o' wind, like a cat's fuff, o' gied the candle, the saws screed like folk, and Mr. Sulis kenned that, live or die, this was the end o' Which, beldam devil! He cried. I charge you, by the power of God, begone, if you be dead to the grave, if you be damned to hell. And at that moment the Lord's ain hand out o' the heavens struck the horror where it stood, the all dade, desecrated corp o' the witchwife, lang keep it frae the grave and hursled round by deals, load up like a brunstane spunk and fell in ashes to the grund. The thunder followed, peal on dirling peal, the riring rain upon the back o' that, and Mr. Sulis loped through the garden hedge, and ran, why skellock upon skellock, for the clocken. That same mornin' John Christie saw the black man pass the muckle cairn as it was chappin' 6. Before icht, he gied by the change house at Knockdow, and no lang after, Sandy Emlellan saw him gone linkin' down the braes frae Kilmackerley. There's little doubt but it was him that dwalled lang in Janet's body, but he was awa at last, and since syne the deal has never fashed us in be weary. But it was a sair dispensation for the minister. Lang he lay ravin' in his bed, and frae that hour to this, he was the man ye ken the day.